All right, I'll go ahead and get started. We'll do brief introductions, but it looks like everyone is connected. Good afternoon. It is after lunch on December 6th, December 6th, 2023. Um, I'm Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is a continuation of the hearing on the pending petition for change by the City of Solvang of Water Right Permit 15878. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference. It is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post these files of these recordings with the Zoom generated transcript to the AHO FTP site. Where we left off before we broke for lunch, we've had heard from Mr. Custis and we're ready for cross-examination. And due to some questions from me, Mr. Custis had made a reference to CDFW Exhibit 125, and we had deferred or sort of left things to pick up our conversation when we reconvened. My understanding is my team made CDFW 125 available to all of you over the lunch break. We tried to look into whether we could make the Zoom transcript and the video recording available, and we just don't have those in time. It takes, I guess, sometimes an hour or two before those are prepared and ready to be uploaded just from the software that we use. So we will get those uploaded as soon as we have them, but we don't have them now, and we probably won't have them uploaded and available for us to look at before the end of the day. So that leaves us with the question of what to do. So I think as I indicated, this just based on my memory of the conversation, my inclination, although I've not made a ruling, but just so you know, my inclination would be to exclude CDFW 125 as essentially an untimely submittal, and then strike the portion of Mr. Custis's testimony that references it, but based just solely on my recollection, I had asked Mr. Custis about connection or disconnection between the subsurface flow and the surface flow. And I think he made a reference to that exhibit, but was explaining the phenomenon based on his own knowledge as an expert. So I suspect that striking would be relative of reference to 125 would be narrow, but I don't have the transcript in front of me and I haven't reviewed the video recording. So that's where I am. I'll turn to Mr. Puccini first. It looks like you're...
Thank you for that. And that all sounds completely reasonable. And I of course have not had access to the transcript as well. If it helps, my recollection is that Mr. Custis was referring to CDFW 125 because it contains a figure that he thought would be useful to illustrate the point that he was making. Similar figures appear in CDFW 118, which he also referenced. So I'll leave it at that. It was really not intended to introduce new testimony, but just to be helpful by way of an illustration that appears in that particular document.
Thank you, Mr. Puccini. I see, Mr. Bivens, you're off mute, so I'll give you the floor next, but we'll all have a chance here. Did you have a comment on this?
Thank you. Yeah, your proposal in terms of exclusion of Mr. Custis's testimony in response to your question sounds reasonable. I assume that's without prejudice to other parties cross-examining him based on CDFW 125.
It is not. So you may, if you would like to to go there, you can do that. So that is my understanding. Did you have anything else, Mr. Bivens?
That's all. Thank you.
Ms. O'Sullivan, does Solvang have any response or further comment on this issue?
Just to say that what you describe as, your recollection of the question and answer is consistent with, what I remember as well. And so that sounds very reasonable. And then I guess I would we don't have to figure this out now, but if a party who did not submit an exhibit for cross-examination then uses that, like, for example, if Mr. Bivens does use the CDFW 125 as a cross exhibit of his own, essentially, at some point I'll just have a question about like who's entering that as an exhibit and if that is going to be entered into the record and by whom. But I think that is probably a question for a later time when those parties are actually admitting their evidence. Just wanted to flag that.
Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I think that's right. My general sense would be that then if, for example, Mr. Bivens were to use CDFW 125, then CCRB would be offering CDFW 125 as a cross exhibit with their offer of, in this case, rebuttal exhibits. Does that fit your understanding, Mr. Bibbins?
It does, as long as I can go ahead and continue referring it to CDFW 125.
I would think we prefer to do that.
Thank you.
Ms. Kinsey, would it be helpful to instruct Mr. Custis not to refer to CDFW 125 unless he is specifically asked, so we don't further complicate this matter?
Yes, please.
Okay, so
Or
Mr.
I can do
Custis.
that too.
Yes, please do that. Yes, you're in charge.
I think that makes sense. Is there anything else we should address before, or any other comments from any of the parties before we bring Mr. Custis back on the screen here, and I turn things over to Ms. O'Sullivan for cross-examination? I assume we have yes, I see Mr. Custis's name on the screen. So I think with that, I would ask Mr. Custis, if you're there, if you can come on camera.
I'm there. I'm not quite sure why I'm not on camera. What button I've got to push?
I don't know. I look
Does
like
start video. Should I do? I don't think that's it. Is it start video?
No, in the bottom of your screen, and anyone else who's better at these things can jump in. But at the bottom of your screen is the video. There's a mute button usually at the bottom.
I see the mute. That's obvious. Oh, there we go. It says start video.
There we go.
I was hoping the start video isn't recording the whole session.
Yeah.
They should say start your video.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
We solved that. Good. We overcame that hurdle. Thank you for joining us back with us, Mr. Custis. I think you probably heard our back and forth, but
yes,
we have this with this, and you didn't. I would just want, you didn't do anything wrong by referring to CDFW 125. Sometimes these things just surprise us all. But if you would please refrain from referring to it unless the exhibit is explicitly brought up by one of the attorneys asking you questions. I think that will keep our record clear going forward. Thank you. With that, I will turn to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. You may cross-examine Mr. Custis when you're ready.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. I appreciate that. And well, it's now good afternoon, Mr. Custis.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for taking my questions today. So you submitted your CV as CDFW 106. Is that right?
I believe that's the number for it. Yes.
Okay. And your CV is comprehensive of your experience?
Okay. It's the highlights of my 43 years experience. Yeah, I mean.
Okay. But your CV does not explain any experience in the San Ynez River Valley in particular, correct?
Not in the San Ynez River Valley in particular, no.
Thank you. In your rebuttal testimony, you claim that Mr. Nicely changed certain aspects of the city's project description, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I want to go through a few of those with you. One of them is that you claim the city selected well locations that are further from the river than what Mr. DeMuha analyzed, correct?
They were further from the river that was in the what they call that, an updated project description that Mr. Muha analyzed.
Okay,
Yes.
but you're aware that the city has not actually selected precise locations for the proposed wells, correct?
I'm aware that they have not definitively said, other than they'll be in Site B, that they were selected those locations. Yes.
Great. Okay. Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up excuse me, never mind. I don't need to pull it up, but you do refer to Solvang 74 in your testimony, right?
Let me see what 74 is by name.
It's the Stetson Technical Memorandum number 6. You refer to that.
Okay, yes. Yeah. I remember what the document is. I don't remember all the
Yes,
numbers.
I should lead with the document name instead of the number.
And then the number, so the record's right. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so you're familiar with Stetson Technical Memorandum number 6.
That's correct.
Okay, and you're aware that this report is part of the city's certified FEIR, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, and so this report was also submitted as part of CDFW's case in chief exhibits as
Yes.
CDFW. Okay, you agree with that? Great.
Yes, I don't know what the number is, but
CDFW 83.
that's that's what's on my list. Okay.
Great, thank you. And you're aware that in Stetson technical memorandum 6 that there is a figure showing 4 potential well locations, correct?
I don't have that in front of me, but I do remember that figure. Yes.
Okay, you do recall that there is a
Yeah.
figure with
Their,
well
their,
locations.
their analysis was for 4 wells, and they put 4 well locations on that figure. Yes.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up Solvang 74, please. Just want to have that in front of us briefly. And Ms. Mullen, if we could go to PDF page 36, please. And we
My
could
screen
zoom
went
out a
blank.
little, and we'll have to crane our necks because it's sideways.
Oh yeah.
But
Okay.
and just yeah, Ms. Mullen, if we could see
There we
the
go.
full page. I know we won't be able to read the text, but Ms. Mullen, could we zoom out just a little farther so we can see the bottom of the page there? Okay, great. And so this is the figure 3 that we were discussing with the four modeled well locations in Stetson Tech Memo 6, correct?
That's correct. That's the one I remember.
Okay,
Yes.
great. And Mr. Nicely selected 2 of these 4 well locations modeled in Tech Memo 6 for his direct testimony analysis, correct?
I believe I didn't make a comparison, the exact location, but I think he picked the 2. They have the term this 3B and 4B are the numbers on this thing. They're in that area. Yeah.
But you agree that he picked, oh,
I was just gonna
Mr.
say-
Nicely picked.
Ms. O'Sullivan, if we're going to stay on this figure, we can rotate it. We have that.
Oh,
we
okay.
have our
that would probably be
capability.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's
Yeah.
make a brief pause, Ms. Muller, if you would please
Oh,
rotate.
good. Straighten my neck out.
Perfect.
Oh,
That's-
now
It's
we got
upside
it.
down, but
We almost had an improvement. Ms. Mullen's very good, though. We'll get there.
Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Okay, and then I think if we can just zoom out or scroll down a wee bit, thank you. And so you agree that Mr. Nicely picked 2 of these modeled well locations for his analysis, correct?
yeah, I agree. He picked 2. Like I said, I didn't compare this image and overlay his Solvang 18 to see if they exactly lined up. But my understanding is that he picked the 2 wells further away from the river, which would be the 2 right wells.
Okay, and as you, we can pull this down, Ms. Mullen, thank you. And as we said earlier, that those well locations in the Stetson Tech Memo 6 report were part of the city's certified EIR. So there was nothing stopping Mr. DeMuha from also choosing to use those well locations in Stetson Tech Memo 6, correct?
Objection. That's beyond Mr. Custis's rebuttal testimony.
This is cross-examination. I can go beyond.
And I'm going to allow her, particularly because this is the first time we've had Mr. Custis before us. So I will allow a cross-examination beyond the scope of his rebuttal testimony. I realize we didn't specifically discuss that, but I am going to allow that here.
And if I may, Ms. Kinsey, I would just also posit that this is within the scope of his rebuttal because he made claims about Mr. Nicely choosing different well locations that were, different from the city's project description or prior in the record. So
Noted.
thank you. So let me rephrase. Mr. DeMuha had the Stetson Tech Memo 6 well locations available prior to his testimony, correct?
He had Tech Memo 6, which is a 2012 report. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to kind of another point that you make about Mr. Nicely's parameters, you state that his TICE analysis appears to differ from the analysis in the Stetson Tech Memo 6, correct?
Well, yes, it does. Yes, I'll just answer yes. I assume you're going to ask me how, but
And you're aware that the Tech Memo 6 was modeling a 2,400 acre foot diversion, correct?
an annual, well, a total annual diversion of 2,400 acre feet. If you go to the, it was flashed on the screen there, the couple of figures before that, where they show they did variable pumping every month.
Right, but the annual,
But the annual
acre
was
feet per
2,400.
year
Yes,
is 2,400. And the Stetson memo was modeling diversion from 4 wells in Site B, correct?
that was my understanding of what they said they did. Yes.
Okay, and this was done to assess the city's original project that was a larger project, correct?
I don't know what the size of that project is, but I'm going to say that's correct.
Okay, and you're aware that the city has subsequently scaled down its project to only request a maximum annual diversion of 1,368 acre feet per
That's
year,
correct.
correct?
Yes,
And that we're only requesting 2 new wells, correct?
that's correct.
And that project was evaluated in the addendum, right?
That's my understanding. Yes,
Okay, and you're aware that Mr. Nicely is analyzing in his analysis the scaled down version of the project, right?
that's my belief. That's what he did. Yes.
Okay. And then you also acknowledge in your testimony that Mr. Nicely is using the 1,107 acre foot diversion rate for his TICE analysis of the wells in Site B, correct?
Okay. Mr. Nicely says he did a pumping of 6 months at the 686 gallons per minute, which is what it, if you pumped 24/7, 365, you come up with 1107. But his pumping was only for 6 months. And as you can see from the tables I have, it's if you pump longer, the drawdown gets slightly more.
I'm just asking
Oh,
you
yes.
about the parameters that Mr. Nicely used in his analysis. So you agree
Well,
that his parameters were based on that 1,107 acre foot diversion, correct?
when you say parameters,
The maximum annual diversion that he was using. Let's go this way. Ms. Mullen, if you can,
the problem I have is the 6 months versus the year.
I
That's where the
understand.
problem is.
Ms. Mullen, if you could bring up Solvang 5, please. And if we can go to, and Mr. Custis, I'll assert to you that this is Mr. Nicely's direct testimony.
Okay.
And if we could go to page 26, Ms. Mullen, with paragraph 65 showing. Okay. You can see that first sentence there, Mr. Custis.
Maybe I can can I get rid of our videos on the side because it's
Oh,
cutting out?
yes. So if you hover, if I may, Ms. Kenzie, I can try to
Sure.
help. If you hover your mouse over the border between the picture, the share screen with the PDF showing and the tiles with everyone's faces,
Yeah.
you should be able to move that.
Move the tile.
Move the
Move the
barrier
screen.
back and forth.
Oh,
Left or
well,
right.
I don't have a mouse. I have a pointer. It's a touch screen. So
There you go.
yeah, that didn't help. Maybe I can. I mean, that thing that moved it out of the way. Okay, I took the videos out of the way. Okay, now I can see the whole sentence.
Okay, you can see the whole screen. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Custis, for working through that with me. Okay, so I'm looking at paragraph 65, and I just want to bring to your attention the first sentence of that paragraph. And it says, for the long-term criteria, we simulated, which Mr. Nicely is referring collectively, the royal we, I guess, simulated 2 wells pumping at a combined diversion rate of 1,107 acre feet from within Site B, equal to 686 GPM combined from the 2 wells for a 6-month period. Okay?
Correct.
Okay, so we can take that down, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. Okay, so suffice to say, Mr. Nicely is using the 1,107 acre foot number, correct?
His drawdown is as if he pumped for a full year to generate
Right.
The pumping rate is as if he pumped the full year to generate 1,007, but he stopped pumping at 6 months, so his drawdown did not complete the full year of drawdown.
Yes, thank you for
Okay.
that clarification. But okay, I think we've gotten that point across. Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up Solvang 19, please. And Mr. Custis, while Ms. Mullen is pulling that up, I will assert to you that the Solvang 19 is the city's addendum.
Addendum. Okay, that's what lists here. Okay.
I think, yes. And there we can see the title, addendum to the water master plan update. And Ms. Mullen,
What's the date of that? That's like a 221 or something, because 2011 report, but what's the update?
Correct. If we scroll down, it'll, I believe, be on there.
Maybe it's on the title here.
I think it's 2021, but
Yeah, a lot of
years
the
are
documents
blurring
are in that time frame. Okay.
Should we try the next page here? Maybe we can try page
yeah.
2.
There it is,
it
2022.
There it
Okay.
is, 2022. Thank you. That always gets me because it was at the turn of the year. We were working on it in 2021.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we could go to PDF page 21, Ms. Mullen. And just scroll down so all of table 2.03 is visible.
Okay.
And Mr. Custis, I just want to point you to the column with a bold total at the bottom of 1,107. Do you
Okay.
see that?
Yes.
Okay, and that is the maximum monthly diversion amount for the proposed wells, which would be in well site B. Do you see that?
I'm inferring that the second to the last column, which says 205 in CFS, relates back to that 90, like in January for 9,400. I think I did that calc, and it's maybe less than 30 days, but yes.
And you see the 1,100.
The 20, well, okay, yes, go ahead.
You see that 1,100.
I see the 1,107 as the sum of those that column, yes.
Okay. And Ms. Mullen, could we just scroll down a little bit so the footnote is visible, actually? Footnotes. Okay. Thank you. All right, and I see, you see footnote E there referring to the 2.05 CFS that you referenced. And suffice to say, the 2.05 CFS is the maximum diversion for those wells in well site B. And then the total annual diversion, the maximum diversion rate, instantaneous rate, and then the annual diversion is in that column with the 1,107 acre feet per year.
Okay, I kind of missed in between 205 and 1,000. You said something about, could you repeat that again?
Yes, so the column with 1,107,
right.
You can see on the bolded line, it's a total diversion amount of acre feet per year. That's the units for that amount.
Yes.
And that applies to the 2 wells in well site B, correct?
That's the combined diversion rate, yes.
Okay, thank you. So that's the same value that Mr. Nicely used, right?
That Mr. Nicely, from my understanding, took that number and averaged it as if he pumped. He wanted a pumping rate for a full year of pumping 24/7, 365. And that comes out to the 686 gallons per minute. That would sum up to roughly 1,107 acre feet per year.
Okay,
yes.
And thank you. And Ms. Mullen, we can pull this down now. So suffice to say, Mr. Nicely is using numbers and criteria available in the city's addendum for his analysis, correct?
There are many numbers in the cities.
I'm referring to the 1,107 acre feet number that we've been discussing.
I think you could pump the 920 gallons per minute.
I'm not asking about the 920 gallons per minute, Mr. Custis. If you could.
But you said the numbers in the table, right?
I'm asking about the 1,107 acre feet per year number. Is the same.
I can come up with 1,107 acre feet per year, pumping 920, but not for a full year.
Okay.
That's
back to my question. If you don't mind,
I'm looking
Mr.
for
Custis.
peak. I'm looking for the peak
Mr.
diversion. So
if I could ask you to
sure.
Answer my questions that I've directed at you. And my question is that Mr. Nicely value
Yes.
that he used of 1,107 is the same as the value of 1,107 in the addendum, correct?
I'm assuming yes, that number is the same.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to talk about your TICE analysis.
Okay.
All right. So you okay, so you performed a TICE analysis on the project based on the information that you had available to you, correct?
Correct.
And you'd stand by that as a reasonable demonstration of potential impacts of the project?
My purpose of doing the TICE analysis was to try to determine whether or not there was going to be drawdown beneath the river at the closest point between the river and the well, and basically at the site B location. Mr. Nicely didn't give us that information. And so
Mr.
that's why I did
again, my question was a little more narrow than that. If you could just respond directly to it. So you stand by that your analysis is a reasonable demonstration of the potential impacts of the project, correct?
All I'm trying to do is demonstrate that there will be a drawdown.
Okay. And you already testified that you didn't use image wells in that analysis, right?
I didn't use image wells in that analysis. That's correct.
Okay. Image wells would create a more conservative analysis, right?
Okay. I don't like the word conservative. Image wells would give me more drawdown.
Okay.
Conservative is an opinion about what's good or bad.
Okay. And Mr. Nicely did use image wells in his analysis, correct?
Mr. Nicely testified in his that he used 2 image wells per well. So yeah, 4 image wells.
Okay. And you state in your testimony that your TICE drawdown should therefore be less than the drawdown calculated by Mr. Nicely because of his use of image wells, correct?
Okay, because he used image wells to simulate a no flow boundary. Yes, you can use image wells for recharge too. So we be specific on the boundary.
And just to clarify, so you predicted that your drawdown should be less than Mr. Nicely's, correct?
It should be less.
Okay, and as you predicted, his drawdown numbers were about half of yours, correct? Or yours were
mine were about half of his.
Excuse
me,
yes. Yours were about half of his, right? Just as you predicted.
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Nicely's, considering the differences with the TICE with the image wells, okay. Mr. Nicely's numbers are consistent with your drawdown numbers, correct?
I don't know if you'll like this, but I actually, once Mr. Nicely said how many image wells he used, that's a critical point. I did an image analysis. I have not submitted it, but it came out very close to what Mr. Nicely did. So, okay. Yes.
Thank you. So essentially you validated his results.
Well, you're getting technical on, I selected a boundary. I actually had to do multiple image wells because you have to select the boundary. And unfortunately the boundary on this site is not a straight line. You know how it curves down towards the Alisal Bridge? Which boundary, the northern boundary or that curved one that's sort of, going towards, do you use? As it turns out, the one that I got the most agreement with Mr. Nicely's was the curved boundary that goes down towards Alisal Bridge.
Okay, thank you. All right.
I don't know which one he used. That's the problem.
Okay. So I want to talk about your Jenkins analysis, and
okay.
I'll try not to belabor this too much because we did go through it with Mr. Demuha as well.
Okay.
So you also rely on CDFW, or excuse me, well, we can just go there. Yeah. So Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up CDFW 92, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
So that's going to be the 2008 thing. Yeah, what is it?
We'll pause at the cover page here for you.
Stetson's 2008 memo. Okay.
Yeah, and if Ms. Mullen, if you don't mind zooming a little out so we can get oriented here with the report. Thank you. Okay, so you're familiar with this report
yes.
And it describes a Jenkins analysis, correct?
In the report, it describes the use of the Jenkins analysis. Yes, there's more to the report, but that,
Yes.
yeah,
But it does offer that description.
yes, it offers it as
Okay,
a model.
great. And if we could go to PDF page 9, Ms. Mullen, that'd be very helpful. And scroll down to the bottom so we can see the bulleted list that starts there. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And so this list right here, Mr. Custis is explaining certain conditions that should be present for Jenkins to provide an accurate assessment of stream depletion, correct?
This is which bullet are you asking about, the last one?
I'm asking generally about the list of bulleted
list of
items
bullets,
in
okay.
general is a list that of conditions that need to be present for Jenkins to be an accurate to provide an accurate stream flow depletion analysis, correct?
Stream stage remains constant. I'm assuming that Stetson properly transcribed what's in that Jenkins. So, okay, yes.
Okay.
I don't have the original in front of me to see if it's the full description, but yes, it seems in the ballpark of what needs to be done.
Okay, and Ms. Mullen, if we could just scroll down a little to also to it continues on either the following page after this figure, yes. And those top 2 bullet points are the continuation of that list, Mr. Custis. And I just want to, to be clear, these factors, the Jenkins factors, whether represented here or from the original Jenkins report, you don't explain how the project or the project site, you don't explain how or whether those conditions are met for the city's project in your testimony, correct?
Well, I'd have to look. This goes back to your objection before. Those, like the ones we're looking at, those are Tice conditions too.
But you don't explain whether they're met for the project, correct?
Constant aquifer thickness, not in my testimony. They
Okay, thank
probably
you.
aren't met at the
That's-
site for this or Tice. Neither one of them.
That's all I'm asking is whether you considered them or not.
Okay.
Okay. And if we could go to page 11, Ms. Mullen. Okay, and if we could scroll down so the last paragraph is visible. And again, this is a list of factors, Mr. Custis, starting with Butler et al., where if present, the Jenkins method would overestimate stream depletion. Do you see that?
Okay, I see that, and the question I have is, do we have Butler in as an exhibit?
So at this point, I'm asking you questions. So I just want you to affirm that you do see that this is a list.
I see that list. That's correct.
Okay, and you didn't evaluate whether any of the factors that are called out here are present for the city's project or the conditions at Site B, correct?
There's many. Well, this is why I'm asking if Butler's in. The Butler conditions are not, Butler's model and what he's writing conditions for are not the same as Jenkins. And so he's making, like the second one where he talks about string bed conductance. He's putting that in. Butler is putting that in. I have his paper. That's why I ask. I know what's in Butler. He's putting that into his model, and that's why he's proposing his model. This is a 2001.
If I can just stop you there because I don't want to get too far down.
Well,
the point is that
you can't evaluate something that doesn't apply. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So you did not, let me put it this way, in your written testimony, your rebuttal testimony, you did not evaluate any factors that would explain whether the Jenkins model would overestimate stream depletion at the city's project site, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, we can pull this down, Ms. Mullen, thank you. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the, so in a response to a question from Ms. Kenzie, You stated that the Jenkins analysis assumes a saturated hydraulic connection, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you also stated that disconnection of underflow from the stream bed and the surface flow does change the stream depletion analysis, correct?
It would change Jenkins stream depletion analysis, yes.
Okay. And you also, in your direct testimony, you state that there's a present condition of an always losing reach in the Santa Ynez River adjacent to Site B, correct?
If based upon the SY water 1111, the water levels are at that location are lower than the base elevation of the river. And so you would infer that that means water flows from the river to that direction of wells. At least, I mean, there's a problem with the location of that well versus flow direction, but yes, that it's a losing reach.
Okay, so you admit that your Jenkins analysis, which assumes a gaining reach, does not actually reflect the conditions near well site B, correct?
Oh, wait a minute. It is no, I think you're mixing losing and hydraulic connection as being only gaining. Losing can be a hydraulic connection. I don't want to mention that thing that we're not supposed to talk about. Okay. I can show you a graph on that, but a figure in 118 that describes what I'm trying to talk about. But the fact
I'll
that it's
leave
a
that for
losing
your
reach
own
doesn't mean that
attorney.
it's not hydraulically saturated connection. That's the problem.
Okay. So you, okay, but you agree that if there is disconnection, that would change the stream depletion analysis, and you didn't analyze stream depletion under a disconnected scenario, correct?
If the stream is developing, if underneath this part of the stream, because it's developing a vadose zone, which is the non-fully saturated, what you call a vadose zone, then Jenkins' model would not be valid in that section of the river. But remember how wide that depletion is.
Okay, thank you. And then in your Jenkins analysis, you assumed a constant pumping rate for 90 days or 180 days straight for each year that you modeled out, correct?
The way the Jenkins is you run it constant. If you'd have to pull up, I don't have it in front of me, but that's why I developed that thing, is I could put 100 years in there if I wanted. I could put 1
With
year
the
and run
Wallace
it out to
correction?
100. Huh?
With the Wallace correction or addition?
Oh, no,
No.
excuse me. I missed your that they're talking about the Wallace. The Wallace correction is about the cycles.
Right. And so
And so I did 180 days, 6 months, 183 days with every year. And then I also did 90 days every year, 2 separate cycles.
And in those cycles, you're assuming that there's constant pumping 24 hours a day, correct?
The pumping rate is, yes, it's constant. And it's cumulatively, I don't know if that, I have to pull that up to see if it gives me the final number, but yes, it's a constant rate of pumping. There's no cycling going on within it.
Within the cycle that you modeled.
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't evaluate whether the city would be exceeding its maximum annual diversion during those periods based on those assumptions, correct?
The pumping numbers, I think that I used, now we're going back to what you did. You can pump at the maximum rate for the 6 months and not exceed the numbers.
Okay. You're aware that wells often need routine maintenance, right?
Correct.
And required to be offline?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're aware that the city has operational constraints on its well 3 through the protest dismissal agreement, correct?
The well 3, based on the, I don't know what their total operational agreements are, but they had the 1.5 CFS. They have to turn it off.
Right.
That's
okay.
One of them?
That's correct. And you're also aware that the city has a finite amount of storage for water that it diverts, correct?
I don't know what their storage capacity is, but almost all utilities don't have it unlimited. Unless they can put it in the reservoir, they don't have an unlimited amount of storage.
Yes, okay, and you didn't, so in your analysis of that cyclical pumping for 90 or 180 days straight from the river wells, you didn't assess whether that would, the city's pumping operations would accommodate that level, that duration of pumping, correct?
Well, the 180 days, I mean, Mr. Nicely's TICE analysis made some inference to that's a reasonable, long-term pumping. But no, I didn't evaluate the city's operational cycles, if you want to call it that.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. Okay, and then I just want to touch briefly on some of the, you showed a lot of hypothetical diagrams to help explain the Jenkins analysis in your presentation this morning, or yeah, it was this morning, I guess.
In the yeah, what's this
Yeah.
morning?
And sorry, I muddled my question with that. So you showed several hypothetical diagrams to explain Jenkins in your presentation, right?
Yes, from this USGS circular, and it's Exhibit 118. Yes,
Okay, and
CDFW 118.
when you were explaining that, you noted that those diagrams were showing a river that had a gaining reach, correct?
The simulation was for a river that was always gaining at the start.
Okay.
Yes.
And you state in your testimony that the Santa Ynez River by well site B, once again, has been a losing reach for some years, correct?
It in the one section, well, compared to well site 1111, the water levels are lower than the bed of the river well, downstream at the lowest section, it's above the river. That's my cross section I show. That's why I put that line in there. So somewhere in between the upstream and the across site B, you transition. In fact,
if we could go to Ms. Mullen, if I can just interrupt you, Mr.
Yeah.
Justice. Ms. Mullen, if we could go to CDFW 108, please. And if we could go to page 11, Ms. Mullen. And have lines 20 through 22 visible. All right, and I just want to read out, you say, starting on the sentence that starts on line 20, this suggests that the present condition of an always losing reach in the Santa Ynez River adjacent to Site B at station 15896 began with the 1987 to 1992 drought. Do you see that?
correct.
Okay, thank you. We can pull that down, Ms. Mullen. All right. I want to move on now. You spend several pages in your rebuttal testimony talking about the reasons for why the subsurface water level has lowered over time, right?
Based on the analysis of the air photos and it's
Mhm.
basically beyond those records, we don't have any, any supplemental information with like surveys of the river or something like that. I mean, elevation surveys of the river that would tell me what's going on. Yes.
Okay, so in your testimony, you conclude that the most likely cause for the current underflow water elevations remaining below the elevation of the adjacent riverbed is pumping of the underflow, right?
That's correct.
Okay. But you weren't able to actually evaluate the relationship between historic subsurface water levels and historical pumping, right?
There was no pumping information available. That's correct.
Okay, so you had to look at other proxies, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And you looked at things like changes in the riverbed elevation and river flows and vegetation, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you said generally the historic streambed elevations were not readily available except for that Buell Flat Rock Quarry Mine Reclamation Plan, right?
They were not readily available in the data that was in the application. I didn't go outside of, you call the county surveyor up and ask them or somebody if they had surveys.
But you did look at that Beulah Flat Rock Quarry Mine Reclamation Plan, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And you found that to be relevant historical information for stream bed elevation?
Say again, I missed the first part.
It's fine. I can move on. Okay, so I want to go, if we could pull up Ms. Mullen, CDFW. Well, actually, you just quoted in your testimony, so we can pull back up CDFW 108. And now I'd like to go to page 7, please. And if we could have lines 17 through 19 visible. Okay, and I'm looking at that sentence that starts on line 17. In the 1930s and 40s, the riverbed was at a higher elevation than it is now. Do you see that, Mr. Custis?
That's yes.
And that's your testimony, correct?
That's yes.
Okay. And then the next sentence says the 1940 photos show an active river channel flowing through the present sand and gravel sorting area, which is now about 20 feet above the river floodplain, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the riverbed elevation was at least around 20 feet higher, according to this, historically, correct?
That 20 feet is sort of coming from the reclamation plan is what they said happened. But yeah, I don't know I know what the well elevation was what I think is 368 or something like that in elevation. And then we're now at 342.
Okay.
So, you know,
and
plus or minus.
You also state in your testimony that the historical decline in underflow water elevations at Site B represents an apparent permanent loss of underflow storage that accompanies a change in the morphology and elevation of the adjacent river system, correct?
I don't, is that it? I'll take your word that you're reading it correctly. I did say something like that, yes.
If Ms. Mullen, if we could go to page 9, please. I can help you out, Mr. Custis.
Okay.
I want you to, it's your testimony, but we can certainly
Right.
pull that.
I mean, it doesn't conflict, I think, with my opinion. So yes.
Yes, in paragraph 12 and then lines 10 through 13, please, Ms. Mullen. Okay, and I just read to you the sentence that starts on line 10 there. So you agree that that's part of your testimony?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And if we could go to page 15, Ms. Mullen, and have paragraph 23 visible. Lines 21 through 20, or 20 through 21, excuse me. Okay, and if you can see that last sentence of paragraph 23, you state that the decline in the San Ynez riverbed elevation of approximately 20 feet since 1940 may be a major factor in the decline of the underflow water elevation at Site B.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And your understanding is that decline is in part because of the construction of the Cachuma Dam, correct?
In part, I find that 20 feet of drop in the elevation just because the construction of the dam is a little. Realize that section of the river where we're measuring surveys has been mined since the 1930s.
Okay.
So the dam would stop sediment being moved downstream, but 20 feet of erosion because you control the flows. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So you acknowledge that the stream bed elevation can affect subsurface water storage volumes.
Stream bed elevation will affect the water level in, the adjacent, in the aquifer adjacent to the stream bed. Yes.
Okay.
And that's storage. So, okay.
Okay. And as we've just gone through, you had relevant historical information demonstrating that there has been a decline historically in stream bed elevation, right?
That's obvious from comparing the 1940s imagery with the river running through the mine and today. Yes.
Okay. So despite that historical information about stream bed elevation decline, your conclusions attributed the subsurface elevation decline to be solely because of pumping, not the stream bed elevation changes, correct?
I don't know if I'd use the word solely. I think I would say that the pumping is today is the factor. Yes. But the sole factor, no, I wouldn't, because obviously the drop in elevation is going to cause drainage of the
Okay.
aquifer.
Ms. Mullen, if we could, let me think, hold on. Okay. I think I'm going to move on. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Okay, if we could go to CDFW 113 for a minute, Ms. Mullen. And this is you had slides on this in your presentation, Mr.
Okay.
Custis, but I think it'll be easier to see things if we're in the actual exhibit.
Okay.
And if we can flip to, I think it's just the next page, Ms. Mullen. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is one of three, but you depict three historical underflow elevations you depict historical underflow elevations in 3 periods, correct?
Yes, in three, yes, 3 periods. I mean, I was picking for that for a reason, but 3 periods, yes.
Okay, and we're looking at the period that you chose from 1973 to 1979, correct?
It says 78, but yes, okay. 79 is on the end of the graph.
Right.
That's
Oh,
just,
yes, I see at the top.
yeah,
78
that's
at the
just
top.
Excel.
Okay.
Funny to have an evenly spaced years. I got to throw 79 in there.
Understood. Okay, and you're depicting riverbed elevations at 2 stations on this graph, correct?
At our current upstream and downstream elevations at Site B, at the most, I think it's 2021, something like that. Yes.
Okay, so those are current stream bed elevations, correct?
I don't. They are current as yes. I mean, like I say, there was when the Buell Flat study was done, which I think is a couple of years ago. So if you want to ask today what it is, I could say that they're correct, but I don't think we've had major scour in the channel. So this is probably correct.
Okay, thank you. And so you're plotting current stream bed elevation against a historical underflow elevation, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you base your conclusion, you make a conclusion in your testimony that the river was gaining throughout this historic period based on that comparison, right?
I said the river was gaining. Is that what you said? I missed that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It appears to gain in the downstream end, except for the short period there in 77.
Mm-hmm.
Upstream end, it's in I'm trying to look at the years. The middle of the graph, it's a losing reach in the upstream end in the middle of the graph. Yeah.
Okay. And my point here, I guess, is that you're making conclusions about whether the river is gaining or losing, even though we know, or we've just established, and your testimony says that the current stream bed elevation was not constant historically, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you don't actually know what the stream bed elevation was during this time period, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. We can take this down, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. All right. I want to just briefly touch on your discussion of evapotranspiration.
Okay.
So you evaluated that as another potential reason for subsurface water level decline, right?
That was because there's a difference in the hydrographs in the recent period. That was dramatic to me. Suddenly, I'm not having those big oscillations that we currently have. I was like, what's the source of that? And that led me to the time period in the photos in which the stream channel next to the mine site didn't have any vegetation in it. So I'm inferring that the loss of vegetation, which I measure this ET, today's ET, not back in 2004,
Mhm.
is the reason that we've lost the reason we've lost those oscillations or
Okay.
in that period. That's, yeah, I'm inferring that. I mean, vegetation does take water out of the river and cause oscillations. The question is it the as much as we are seeing? Is it 4 to
Okay.
6 feet, or is it just a foot?
And you, for that same period, you did not have data on any changes in pumping that might have occurred during that period,
There's
correct?
no data. There's no data available on pumping at any time in this
Okay.
site B or the wells that Mr. Nicely showed in his figure around
So
there.
you don't have the information to actually isolate the change being associated to evapotranspiration, correct?
I don't have enough information to separate out whether the pumping, which I'm assuming since they're all the wells that Mr. Nicely showed, some of them were working. I know the mine has a well on it and they were operational, so they probably pumped a well. But how much? I have no idea. So I couldn't separate. All I have is the drawdown difference. And here's one factor that contributes to that. How much? I can't answer that.
Okay. And you didn't compare directly whether the stream flows and the evapotranspiration, whether the oscillations would have changed because of that, correct?
One of those figures, one of those three figures was in that time period. And to me, the oscillations in the stream, the amount of flow was pretty regular. And so I think I concluded that it wasn't the release, it wasn't the downstream flow that was changed a lot. Like the first one you showed just recently, where that's kind of during a drought period, you could see that there was no downstream flow. And suddenly at the end, you got this huge recharge and the whole system came back up. But in the time from 2004 to current, which was the time we're talking about, you have a pretty regular downstream flows. So I concluded that it's not the releases that are, or the downstream flows that are causing those major oscillations. Well, a change in oscillation.
Okay,
Let's put that way.
but with the incomplete information of the pumping data, you have to essentially assume let me back up. Based on your evapotranspiration
Okay.
analysis, you then make certain conclusions about potential drawdown effects, right?
I make a statement that if that is solely due, if the oscillations of 4 to 6 feet from the 2004 where we're not seeing it, when the vegetation was gone, is totally due to vegetation, then the question is, how does 275 acre feet of withdrawal of water causes that kind of an impact?
But that's
Got a
based on
problem.
an assumption that it's
That's
all
on it. Well, I'm putting it out as saying I'm not sure I would believe it.
okay.
I mean, that's why I don't really think it does, and that's why it concludes me to think there's pumping going on in there that's causing that. If you want to, I don't want to draw. I haven't seen in other studies that I've been involved with it, where like in Bishop, it's in my CV. We're doing a pumping study up in Bishop, and it's because the water levels, when they turned the well on, dropped down and killed 300 acres of endangered species.
Okay, I think we're getting
But it's not like 6 feet of drop. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so my point being is you're making a conclusion about a drawdown depth, which based on an evapotranspiration value.
I'm making that conclusion, and I think I said because I don't have pumping, I can't separate out, which you're talking about, how much of that is due to that oscillation. So yes.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. Ms. Mullen, if we could go to CDFW 108, page 14, please. And have paragraph 22, lines 18 through 21 visible. All right, if you could, if I'm gonna look at refresh your recollection to the sentence that starts on line 18 and ends on line 21, starting with if the riverbed ET causes.
Yes.
Okay, so in this sentence, you're making a conclusion about the Solvang's potential drawdown based on your assumption of ET, of drawdown, or, well, I should say subsurface elevation decline due to evapotranspiration, correct?
I'm not following the sentence, but I think what you're trying to say is I'm making I'm making a calculation that if all of that decline, that what I'd say 4 feet, is due to ET at a 275 acre feet per year loss, that would translate to 4 times, 16 foot of drawdown with 1,107 acre feet. Yes.
Right. And that's based on the assumption that you just said you're not sure is a good one,
That's
that
right.
all of that is coming from evapotranspiration, the evapotranspiration is the only factor, correct?
Is the only factor in the decline in the underflow elevation. That's correct.
Okay. And you, Mr. Demuha didn't calculate any drawdown by comparison to evapotranspiration values, correct?
No, he did.
Okay, and neither did Mr. Nicely?
I don't believe Mr. Nicely. He didn't speak of it. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
In his
And
testimony.
Ms. Mullen, we can pull this down, pull the exhibit down. Thank you. And the industry standard way to calculate drawdown is through a TICE analysis, right?
Okay. An industry way to predict a TICE analysis is meant to find the transmissivity of the
Okay.
pump test. So
Let me
you're
back up.
pumping the well and figuring out what the characteristics are. We're turning it around and saying if the well's characteristics were this, what would the drawdown be?
Let me phrase
There
it
are
another
more
way.
methods than just TICE. So
The typical way to evaluate drawdown is not by comparing it to evapotranspiration values, correct?
in a regional sense, yeah, that would be correct.
Okay. And your own TICE analysis found drawdown of subsurface water elevation to only be 1.5 feet at the closest point on the river after pumping for 183 days with no flow in the river, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And 1.5 is a lot less than 16, right?
I think you're misreading. I don't think the 16 is only to ET is a real expectation. Because
Okay.
I think the other part of that sentence said, unless there's refill.
Okay, so your conclusion about the 16 feet is unfounded then?
I wouldn't say it's unfounded. It's basic flow of logic. Is it something that I think is going to happen? No, not for just because of ET. That leads me to the thinking that it's pumping. There's some pumping going on that causes that oscillation.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Custis. I appreciate you taking my questions today.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Thank you, Mr. Custis. I'm just going to see who else may have questions for you, and then we can decide when an appropriate time, if you need a break or how we're going to go. So I will look to Mr. Bivens. Do you have questions for Mr. Custis?
I will have some questions, not a huge number, but some, and a break would be most welcome.
Okay. Let's go ahead and I assume you won't object, Mr. Custis, to a.
No, I'm fine with having a break. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We'll return at 2:18 and pick up with Mr. Bivens.
Okay.
Thank you.
else it is. Put it this way, I did it because it looked ridiculous.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started as soon as we have Mr. Custis back. All right, and Mr. Custis, I think my team put you on mute over the break, so you will have to unmute. I think if I'm right, spacebar sometimes works, or
There
we
he
go.
is. Unmuted.
Wonderful. I will hand things back over to Mr. Bivens. You may ask your questions of Mr. Custis.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Custis.
Definitely.
My questions are going to focus primarily on this concept of connection versus disconnection.
Okay.
And I'm always disappointed in myself when I try to ask questions about hydrogeology, so bear with me, please.
I try not to get too confusing.
So, for purposes of your testimony, you've assumed that the San Ynez underflow is in connection with the surface stream, correct?
That's correct.
And then, are there physical characteristics of the San Ynez River that lead you to believe that that's a valid assumption?
You see, besides when there's water in the river, you see pools that have surface water. I mean, I interpret the pools to be have water, that water is underflow that sustains itself. That's Hopkins' report sort of goes through that exercise of when the flows stop going between the pools, then the pools are being sustained by the underflow. And the analysis was, well, when that happens, you better move your wells away. You're pumping away from the river so you don't, pull all the water out of the pools because you're pulling underflow. So I see that in those air photos that what's it, 111, CDF 111, and mainly that are from 1994 to current. If you go through those, you'll see a lot of times where there are pools in the river, even though there's no continuous thread of continuous wetted channel in the river. So I infer those pools to be sustained by underflow. Yes.
Okay. And then Ms. Mullen, can we have exhibit Solvang 171, paragraph 36 on page 14, please? I'm looking, yes, okay, and so, Mr. Custis, this is Mr. Nicely's rebuttal testimony, and he states there, starting on line 2, as I explained in paragraph 26 above, in an ephemeral river such as the San Ynez, the subsurface water level is intermittently disconnected from surface flow. Do you see that?
Starting on, as explained, yeah, intermittently disconnected below, and he says below the thawag of the stream bed. Okay, yes.
Yeah, my question, Mr. Custis, is your assumption that the underflow is in connection with the surface flow of the San Ynez River mutually exclusive with Mr. Nicely's opinion that the subsurface water level is intermittently disconnected from surface flow?
Okay, now we're stepping into disconnection definition.
Yes, that is what I'm looking to understand.
Okay. The when you drop the water level below the thawag of the river, you start to develop a vadose, an unsaturated zone. Some people would term that as the start of disconnection. Essentially, it's actually a transition to disconnection. You eventually drop the water level low enough that you get a you know, let's say a thick zone of unsaturated material. And then the issue is that the seepage from the river becomes a constant as opposed to that transition from when it just drops below the riverbed to where you get this, certain a certain depth. So you're disconnected, but at the same time you're still losing flow to the from the river. So it's not like you stop losing flow. That's what I'm saying.
So is it fair to say that even when the river even when, sorry, strike that. Is it fair to say that even when the subsurface water level is below the thalweg of the stream bed, there's still a hydraulic connection between the surface flow and the subsurface
Yes.
water because of that seepage?
Yes, and in fact, the problem that you get into is that as that water level drops, where you think you're disconnecting more, you're actually creating a condition where you have more seepage. Your increases of seepage loss go to a maximum. That's what happens.
And why is that, Mr. Custis?
It's because of Valladolid's zone hydraulics. It has to do with suction. In other words, we're always talking about saturated, and so the water level is, you put a pipe in it, or the water level is what the water level is. But when it's unsaturated, water can actually flow uphill, and that's because of the soil has suction. So as you dry the soil out, it kind of like, think of it as trying to pull more. The surface tension increases and the suction level goes higher. The negative pressure gets higher, and that means that it's because water moves by pressure change. It creates more seepage.
And so does that increased suction, if you will, tend to increase the rate of infiltration to the
Yes.
alluvium?
That's the issue, is that when you disconnect, instead of making it better, you're making it worse.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Custis. So now, Ms. Mullen, can we have exhibit CDFW 125, please? Okay, Mr. Custis, this is a document that was submitted by CDFW as exhibit CDFW 25, and it appears to be entitled, "What is a disconnected stream?" Did you review this document preparing to give your testimony today?
Yes.
And what is this document?
It's a summary of the authors in this, particularly the second author has written a number of papers on this subject, and this is a presentation.
Ms. Mullen, if I can object here, this is starting to really feel like a friendly cross. Mr. Bivens is asking open-ended questions and giving Mr. Custis essentially an opportunity to testify again.
So I guess number one, while typical cross-examination procedure is to ask leading questions, it's certainly not required. Two, CCRB is not aligned with CDFW in this matter. And three, the issue of connection versus disconnection and what it means is, I think, one of the central issues in this case, and certainly a central area of disagreement between Mr. Custis and Mr. Nicely, and I'm entitled to explore exactly what their difference of opinion is.
So here's my impression. I had a similar impression, Ms. O'Sullivan, in a way. But I think I also noted that Mr. Bivens' client is not entirely aligned, although I was thinking through the interest in this line of questioning here. That said, it is also true that this has been a significant issue of discussion. We can talk about whether it's appropriate for the city to have a chance to respond to this, but I think this is helpful for me because some of what Mr. Custis is saying is new, which is precisely why you're objecting to it, but also I think is helpful. So I'm going to allow this line of cross-examination, and then we'll, with the understanding that it may be that the city needs an appropriate opportunity to respond. So I'll keep that in mind. So go ahead, Mr. Bivens.
Okay, so Mr. Custis, is this paper type of document that hydrogeology experts would typically rely on in forming opinions about connection of surface flow and underflow in a stream system?
Yes, it's a presentation at this conference, and they're summarizing the work that they have done, and in the and I put some web links to the couple of the papers at the very bottom of this, where they get into much more detail of scientifically of what they're summarizing here. But I found this to be a good layman's summary, if you want to call it that, of all the critical issues of this subject.
Okay, and so based on this exhibit CDFW 125, how would you define a disconnected stream?
You probably should go to the second page of this, to the graphic, which helps.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, could you please scroll down to the second page, please?
Now, I don't know if you can. There's two figures in there, and they kind of link. We can start with the one on the top, which is it's basically talking about showing you what a connected reach is, and this is a losing reach. This is not a gaining reach. Water is leaving the river or the stream, as they call it. And they infer this concept of transition from, as the water table is dropping, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of a capillary zone, but that's kind of like not fully unsaturated. It's still got some water in it. And that's still intersecting the river. And then the disconnected is when it gets far enough down that this capillary zone is now well below the river, and the seepage is still occurring, but at that point it's a constant. Okay. Now, if we go down to the next figure, figure 2, it sort of gives you the, I guess, the engineering behind this. Okay. This is a graph of the pressure where we're talking about this. We're talking about the suction thing. Ignore that part of the low pressure, but the infiltration rate on the left-hand side of the graph, its infiltration is increasing going up. And the head difference, meaning the elevation of that mound, basically, right, between the bottom of the river and that mound, increases as you go to the right. And they have connected, transition, and disconnected. And so what you see is during the connection, you have as you're dropping the head, the elevation of the groundwater, that's causing a head difference. So you're getting more loss in the river, but at a certain point you create that vadose zone, which is your transition. And when you get far enough down below, the base of the river, it's disconnects. But when it disconnects, it's at a constant rate, but it's at a maximum rate. So you're dropping the water level below the river is just creating more infiltration up until the point where it just becomes, constant at a maximum.
I see. And if we could just scroll up back to figure 1, please, Ms. Mullen. So, Mr. Custis, if I understand your testimony correctly, the definition of a disconnected stream is when that capillary zone is below the Thelweg of the surface stream. Is that right?
I think it would be, yeah. I mean, it would be when the seepage is gone to a constant. Yes, and that's when the capillary ridge zone goes down low enough. Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful for me to understand what's going on here. So, Ms. Mullen, if we could go back up to the to the first page, please. That's perfect. And then there's the second paragraph of the introduction section begins with sentence, the following statements, all of which can be found in the scientific literature, are incorrect as general definitions of disconnected rivers. And then there are a bunch of, well, 5 bullet points that follow that, correct?
Correct.
And the 4th bullet point says that it reads, a river is disconnected if the water table is below the stream bed. Do you see that?
That's what it says. Yes, correct.
And so, do you agree that that statement that a river is disconnected if the water table is below the stream bed is, what's the word I'm looking for? Generally incorrect.
I think what they're inferring, which is that, and this is a common assumption, is that when the water table, first goes below the stream bed, is if you could, if you were measuring it, it would, an inch or 2 or 6 inches, whatever, that is when disconnection happens. And they're saying, no, that's transitional. So
And
it's below, it starts to disconnect the minute it goes below the water, below the bed, but it doesn't become fully disconnected until it drops much lower.
And you generally agree that the river is not necessarily disconnected at the point the water table is below the stream bed?
In this term of disconnection, yes, I would say it's transitional and follow their nomenclature.
Okay, and then if you look at the second bullet point, this paper seems to indicate that the statement that pumping under a disconnected stream will not affect stream flow is generally incorrect. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's an important. There's 2 aspects to that, but yeah, that's an important point.
And why is that statement generally incorrect?
It's because you're still having seepage. Remember on the previous one, as you drop the water level from, just below the stream bed to some depth, which is based upon the soil characteristics and the stream bed characteristics. So it's not like a constant drop. I think the last bullet says twice the depth. That's not, somebody decided that that's all you have to do. You're increasing the flow. So your pumping is actually causing more. If there's water in the stream, your pumping is actually causing more loss in the stream flow. So you are causing an effect on the stream by pumping and drawing the groundwater level down. The second component to this, which they did talk about in their further on in the paper, is remember the stuff, all the land and the river and the land, the river, and the groundwater have a slope to it. And so if you're dropping, if you have, say, like we have, I think we have at Site B, based on the elevation of the river and the water level in SY 1111, we have a transition from a losing upstream section to a possible gaining downstream section. So somewhere in there, and actually, this is introducing another subject, but right in the middle is where the GSP put their monitoring point. You have this going from gaining to losing. If you're continuing to pump, that point in the river migrates downstream. You see, because the water level's dropping, and so that your bottom of the river elevation and the groundwater is separating further and further downstream, and that causes when the more seepage rate. So not just at one point, but down the entire length of stream, you're creating more seepage. So that's the thing. They talk about this in this article. That's the thing they're trying to point out, is that you can't look at one point. You have to look, 3-dimensionally, basically, or 2-dimensionally down the river.
See. So I'd like you to imagine a situation in which Solvang is pumping from its river wells, and there are no stream flows. No surface stream flows.
No
Now
surface.
that pumping, when there are no surface stream flows, there obviously wouldn't be an immediate effect on surface stream flows, correct?
Okay. Because of I infer the pools. We'll go back to the. I infer if there's pools that have water in them that you have underflow, and the underflow is connected underneath the river. It's just not. You just don't have a wetted channel on the top of the river everywhere. So if you pump, you're going to drop the water level in the pools. That's what the Hopkins report was talking about. So you know you're still having a saturated condition underneath the pools until you drain all the water down and the pools drain.
Okay, let me ask it a little
Okay.
differently, Mr. Custis. So just assume a completely dry surface channel, no pools, no
No
nothing.
pools. Okay.
It's dry down there. The pumping is not going to cause any immediate impact on stream flows, correct?
If there's no flow in the river, the pumping will not cause an immediate impact. That's correct.
And so if flow later returns to the surface stream, will the pumping tend to cause impacts to the surface flows later on when they return?
If you drop the water level deep enough so that you're at the the maximum depth of infiltration rate, it's far enough that you're at the maximum, or even in between in the transition zone, you're causing, as water comes along, you're taking more infiltration from the flows that are occurring until they fill up and make a saturated condition. So yeah, it does have an effect. It's both in the fact that you've got storage that's lost. Water level can't, the saturated water level can't come up to the bottom of the river until you fill that void. And that's not a one-dimensional void. It's three-dimensional. So as the water's filling in, it's spreading out. So now you're having to fill it. So it just becomes a bigger void and a higher rate of infiltration. So yeah, it has a volume and a rate impact.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions for Mr. Custis.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. I'm going to go around the room, but I thought I would let you know, Ms. O'Sullivan, my intent is to at least allow you, before we get to, well, maybe we can do it after. Before we get to redirect, I'm going to return to you. If you have questions based on Mr. Bivens' cross, essentially I'm giving you a second bite at cross-examination, so you can think about that as I go around the room. I think that's fair here. I will go down my list. Do I have, does the parent district have questions for Mr. Custis?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. ID number 1.
No questions.
Thank you. And Alisal Guest Ranch.
No question, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hall, I see you came on video. Were you intending to ask Mr. Custis questions?
No, no questions.
Prepared. Okay. Ms. O'Sullivan, I'll give you, I know I put you on the spot here, but if you want the opportunity now to ask any follow-up questions based on Mr. Bivens' cross and the subject matter of that cross, you are welcome to ask them now.
Okay, yes, I think I have just 2, but I just want to say that taking this opportunity, I'm not waiving any assertion of that Solvang would want to potentially respond in writing to this brand new exhibit and line of questioning that was not previously put forward in a timely manner. So I'll leave it at that.
And I'm sorry, just for the record, I'm also entitled to put on cross exhibits without advance notice to the parties. So I just want to say I disagree with the assertion that this cross exhibit wasn't put forward in a timely manner, that my cross examination wasn't timely.
Understood. And I think I understood the content, you know, the debate here is whether this is a surprise testimony that's fairly presented here, and we'll address those issues. So I think I understand the conflict here, but go ahead, Ms. O'Sullivan. You can ask your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey, and thank you, Mr. Custis. Just briefly, the Hopkins report that you refer to with respect to the pools, that report was analyzing an area upstream of the Alisal Bridge, correct?
That's correct.
Not well site B.
Not well site B. That's correct.
Okay. And the seepage rate in an alluvium depends on the type of materials that the alluvium is made out of, correct?
The seepage rate of all groundwater movement is dependent upon the grain size analysis and, well, the size and the distribution of the grains, you know, how much is gravel and sand and the percentages and all of that. So yeah, it's
Okay,
dependent on materials.
This should be obvious, but Solvang's pumping doesn't change the composition of the gravels, correct, in the San Ynez River?
No, not in the San Ynez River. It should not. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I don't have additional questions for Mr. Custis. I'm going to look to my team. Mr. Wooldridge or Mr. Anderson, do you have questions at this time?
No.
All right, thank you. Then I will turn back to you, Mr. Puccini. Do you have redirect for Mr. Custis?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Custis, at the beginning of Ms. O'Sullivan's cross-examination, she was asking you about your experience with rivers like the San Ynez River. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And what was your response?
I do not have, other than this project, I do not have hydrogeologic experience in the San Ynez River Valley. Certainly not in hydrogeology. I may have geotechnical, not hydrogeology.
But, okay, thank you. And your CV indicates, however, that you have experience with other locations, correct?
That's correct.
You're familiar with the physical characteristics, or I'll call the lithologic profile of the San Ynez River alluvium, correct?
Based on what's been presented, mainly in the Stetson report and the GSP, generally I haven't, and the one well log that Brian submitted, I haven't pulled all the well logs and analyzed it myself.
Based on that understanding, would you say that you have examined other rivers or project locations that are very similar to what we see here in the San Ynez River?
Yes.
Can you identify a couple of examples just to give us a sense?
Well, I was asked I don't know how many years back, by the water branch people in Fish and Wildlife to look at the infiltration that occurs from dam releases in the Santa Maria River. The question they were wanting to know was, how much water do we have to release to get the water past the central part, which is where the farming is happening, so that they maintain flows for the steelhead to be able to migrate from the ocean and get up into the upper reaches before the flows stop. They don't want to strand them. So it's right up the road in Santa Barbara County. I don't know if you want to look at the Big Sur River. It's not quite the same. It's a little more confined. And I've worked in, let's see what I've got. The Owens Valley is somewhat like it as far as geology goes. I mean, it's a different part of the Sierra, but I've got a river this is just north of Bishop. So the Owens River always flows, but it is dealing with pump tests and vegetation impacts and the rate of drawdown from a pumping well and what it does to vegetation. The South Fork, the South Fork of the Kern River, which is above, what's the dam there? I'm drawing a blank right now, but we have Canebrake Ecological Reserve, and the situation was is that there was a ranch that used to have and it does still have a pre-1914 water right was sold, and the applicant wants to move the water downstream into the Kern County, but they want to pump groundwater to replace the water they were using in the ranch. And so the concern was essentially what we have here is you've got basically a gravel river that you're going to pump next to, and what's going to happen to all the riparian and all of we have many of the same flycatchers and many of the same endangered species in that section of river. So that was that. I don't know what the status of that is, but I evaluated the modeling of that and made recommendations.
Okay.
I keep going down.
No, I think that'll suffice.
The Mojave. I also I advised the Fish and Wildlife and the Attorney General's office on the Mojave River adjudication, which is that it's not, it's dry, sometimes not dry. There's a transitional period, which is always flooded. It has to be by the adjudication. The monitoring wells systems are in there to protect the wildlife like we're trying to do here.
Okay, thank you. So is it fair to say that the fact that you haven't had a lot of experience other than more recently with the San Ynez River is not a limitation in terms of your ability to reach conclusions? In fact, the conclusions you reach in rebuttal testimony.
I would say it doesn't. I don't consider it an effect on my ability. Geology is, the science of geology is to understand a lot of very conditions around the world and around us.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we pull up CDFW 92, please? And can we go to PDF 11, please? Can we move up to yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Oops, a little too far. Okay, perfect. Mr. Custis, could you read the first sentence in the first full paragraph shown on the screen beginning with field conditions?
Field conditions do not always meet these assumed conditions, but the Jenkins methodology should be a suitable approach to estimate depletion results from a pumped well, period.
Thank you. And Ms. Mullen, can you go to now PDF 17, please? Can you read the first and second sentences in this paragraph beginning with stream depletion?
Okay. Stream depletion resulting from pumping is not necessarily instantaneous. Some instantaneous or near instantaneous responses, stream flow reduction in parentheses, can occur from the pumping of wells that are located immediately adjacent to a stream and that are producing water from a deposit in a hydrologic connection to the stream.
Okay, thank you. And then the next two sentences basically is a recommendation by Stetson that Jenkins serves as a guide.
Objection. This does not seem to be responsive to my cross-examination.
You were asking Mr. Custis about the appropriate use of Jenkins. Let me rephrase the question. Mr. Custis, if Jenkins is not used to make some determination or estimation as a stream flow depletion, earlier today, in response to Ms. Kenzie's question, you identified that you would have to do something different, and you described specifically a number of monitoring wells along the river with seepage transducers. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We can go off this exhibit now. Thank you. Ms. Mullen, could you pull up CDFW 118, please? Can we go to PDF 14, please? Okay, and I'm looking for figure 4.
Hmm.
So I might be off some pages here.
Yeah.
Perhaps can we go up until we find figure 4? I'm sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, just below there, I believe.
Was it, was figure 4? That we
I
just.
believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Is that, I don't know. I don't think that's figure 4, but
Okay. That's figure 7. Sorry.
try typing in page 6 and see what happens. On mine, it's page 6.
I had it as PDF 14. I apologize.
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
problem with it. There it
Okay.
is.
All right. This these figures are also figures that help, you know, that help with the understanding of losing and gaining reaches, correct?
Correct.
What they actually mean. Okay. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because there was some questions by Ms. O'Sullivan about whether or not the San Ynez River is a losing or gaining reach. Can we move now to, and I hope I get this right, it's PDF 47.
Probably 39.
PDF, I'm sorry if I can rely on Mr. Custis, you think is PDF 39 or,
I think it's page 39.
okay.
This one's in my copy of it. It matches the actual page number. There we go.
Okay, that is it. Yes, thank you. These are, Mr. Bivens was just asking about CDFW 125 and some of the misconceptions. These are without reference whatsoever to CDFW 125. Obviously, this is describing some common misconceptions about stream flow depletion, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And one of them is one misconception is as misconception 2 reads, depletion is dependent on the rate and direction of water movement in the aquifer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is what this is this saying that regardless of whether you have a losing or gaining reach, you will have depletion?
That's my interpretation of the direction of water movement. They're talking more in like on a map view, but it translates to the cross sections that we just looked at. The model that I showed originally was an all gaining reach, so the flow was always heading towards the river. Well, you could have a losing reach in which the flow is leaving the river, flowing away from the river. But when the water level is such that it's fully saturated, like it was on both of those, gaining and losing on figure 4 we just looked at, then you have the potential for stream depletion when you pump on the adjacent. You still have it when it's a losing reach and it starts to disconnect, but they're just talking about this issue, this big picture issue of fully saturated connection and the inference. I think it was I think Stetson had it in one of the, Jenkins was not valid if it's the flow is moving towards the river, which is a gaining reach, and that's not correct. You can intercept that flow. So that's
Okay,
kind of what they're trying to get to in this paper.
okay. And I think you did address that in previous testimony. Thank you. Can we now go to CDFW 108, please? Thank you. And if we can go to page 5 of this testimony. Okay. And then just if we can move down just a little bit, that'd be great. Let's keep going. Thank you. Okay, we can stop there for now. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So at line 8, Mr. Custis, a sentence begins with the diversion of river flow. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just read that first full sentence, please?
The diversion of river flow by a pumping well is spread out along the river, varies with the pumping duration, and continues after the pumping stops.
Okay, and can you read the second sentence as well, please?
The hydrogeologic setting of the Solvang's wells will result in the river losing flow from the pumping along a long section of river, not at a single location.
Thank you. Do you recall your responses to Mr. Bevan's testimony just now?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, questions. Is it your opinion that these two sentences are consistent with your testimony in response to his cross-exam questions?
I think so. I think he was asking. Well, I have to think of who asked the question, but he was asking the last question I think was about infiltration rates and whether the pumping will cause, even when it's disconnected, will cause flow losses, increase the flow losses when the water does come along. You've got a dry river, and you're still dropping water level below it, and then winter comes along, and suddenly you've got surface flows coming in. Is that pumping not caused an impact to the river? And I think my answer is that both the infiltration rate will go up and the volume of infiltration that you have to before the river, the water level comes up to the river and saturates it. So I think it's consistent.
Okay, thank you. But let's look more specifically again at the language. We're talking about, as you state, the diversion will spread out along the river.
Right.
A long section of the river. Do you recall that response to his testimony?
Yeah, I think what I tried to say was that as you have this transition from a losing and gaining reach, and as you pump, that transition moves further downstream, downriver, and causes more and more of the river to the water level to drop below the riverbed, which could harm, in our concern, would harm vegetation, but it also causes losses in the river pools or the flow of. So it's the pumping impact is not just at one point; it migrates downstream. It's basically the way to say.
And does it migrate downstream at the same? Does it migrate both downstream and upstream at the same distance?
In an ideal setting, it does. In other words, going back to the ideal conditions, again, Jenkins and other flow models are based on Tice, the drawdown.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have an infinite aquifer, then the drawdown would be, you have a problem with an existing water level. Let's assume we have a flat system. The drawdown will be spread equally upstream and downstream. In this setting, we have a problem because we know we have a constricted, we don't have an infinite aquifer. And that's why
Ms. Kinsey, I'm going to object here. I think this is going outside the scope of Mr. Bivens' questions, and certainly it's well outside the scope of my own, and I think even your questions.
I think we've been through many of these points, Mr. Puccini. So, and I appreciate your testimony, Mr. Custis. But I'm going to sustain the objection. And if we can move forward from here, I would appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. I think you've been asked questions a lot about, Tice and Jenkins, and I think you've been trying to explain that there's some relationship between Tice and Jenkins, but I don't know if you've been given full opportunity to really explain what that relationship is. Would you care to explain the relationship?
Well,
Correction, when none of the cross questions asked about the relationship between Tice and Jenkins.
I think that's right, Mr. Puccini, but do you care to respond?
I'm sorry, are you asking if I care to respond or Mr. Custis?
Actually, if you care to respond, I mean, I don't think we got into I know Mr. Custis mentioned the relationship that there is a relationship between Tice and Jenkins, but I don't think that was asked on cross.
It was asked in response to cross, and that's why I'm raising it now.
Mr. Custis raised it in response to cross.
That's correct.
okay, can I go?
And
Or
at that, if Ms. Kinsey, if I
thinking.
may, I mean, at that point, I stopped him because it wasn't what I was asking him. So
Right.
I would maintain that's outside the scope of
Right.
redirect.
I will make it easier for everyone and withdraw the question. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Okay. Mr. Custis, Ms. O'Sullivan, let's actually, if we can go to paragraph 22 with the exhibit up right now, 108, please. Great. That's fine. Thank you. You recall Ms. O'Sullivan asking a lot of questions about this work that you did to try to determine the reason that the underflow level of the river is below the surface channel.
yes,
Okay. Is it accurate to state that in paragraph 22, you are not asserting that the revised River Wells project will result in a 16-foot decline in underflow storage, correct?
a decline of 16 foot based on the ET losses that are occurring in the in the river adjacent to Site B. I don't really mean to say that. I mean, I find that would be difficult, and later on I sort of use it as a reason why I think there's got to be some pumping out there, because it doesn't meet my experience with what the drawdown that ET causes to shallow groundwater.
Okay.
So
yeah,
maybe I could have said it better, but I don't think that you're going to get it's the ratio type of thing. If it's it's like if you got 270 acre feet of loss to ET, that means you're going to have 16-foot decline from the Solvang's pumping. I would find that hard to believe myself. So yes.
in other words, the reason for that statement is to support your proposition that a significant factor in the decline of underflow is due to pumping, and it's not.
Right.
Okay. It's not the proposition that you've determined that there will be that kind of decline in underflow as a result of the River Wells project, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You're asked some questions about the use of Wallace earlier. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And would you agree that Wallace is not intended to quote unquote cure Jenkins? Is that correct?
No, Wallace is it's a supplement to Jenkins.
And I think you explained the reason to do Wallace is to basically take into account a cyclical pumping regime, right?
What Wallace did was make it easy to take into account a cyclical pumping. If you
Okay.
didn't have Wallace, you'd have to do it like an image well analysis. You'd have to do it manually.
Objection. My questions along in the Wallace was simply about his conclusions, not about the relationship between Jenkins and Wallace. And I don't think anyone else touched on that in their questioning. So I would say that that's outside the scope of redirect.
I'm going to overrule that objection. It's frankly helpful background information about Wallace and what it does. So I'll allow this. I don't know if you have any more, Mr. Pacini, on.
I do not. That's all I had on that one. Thank you. And I might be done. Let me just check my notes. Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Kenzie, I have no more questions for Mr. Custis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pacini. Ms. O'Sullivan, based on that redirect, do you have additional questions for Mr. Custis?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Bivens, I will ask you, do you have any additional, based on the redirect, do you have any additional questions for Mr. Custis?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with that, that is, I can thank you, Mr. Custis. Thank you so
Okay.
much for joining us today. I really appreciate your
My pleasure.
testimony and taking the time to answer my questions and everyone's questions. So I really appreciate it. And you are excused for the day. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
At least from me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, can I turn my, Steve's gonna want to talk to me.
I believe at this point, my understanding is we have completed CDFW's rebuttal witnesses for today. We still have Mr. Evans, but that we will be hearing from him on the 13th. Is that accurate? An accurate understanding?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. And then I think I had asked Ms. Hall, I had asked for you to have Dr. Trish available, who I believe has been on the line and with us. At this point, are you prepared to call Dr. Trish
Yes,
to
we're
present his
prepared.
rebuttal testimony?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. And Dr. Trish, we can, I see your video is on. I don't know if your camera, well, now I can see more of your face. There we go.
Yay.
That's great. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us late in the day.
Yeah.
And I will just give you a brief reminder. Dr. Trish, do you recall taking the oath regarding the truth of your testimony when you testified in this proceeding on November 8th, I believe it was?
Yes, I do.
And do you understand that your oath applies to your testimony today?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I will turn this over to you, Ms. Hall, if you would, in your introduction, just please ask Dr. Trish to affirm that his written rebuttal testimony is true and correct, and also identify the exhibit number. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. William Trush, who is California Trout's expert witness. His rebuttal testimony has been submitted as Cal Trout Exhibit 37. Dr. Trush, can you please confirm that Cal Trout 37 is a true and correct copy of your rebuttal testimony?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed with your oral summary.
At first, I wondered why I was going to be doing a rebuttal on Mr. Gibson. Then I realized that he's also your biologist, even though he's mostly policy person. And so I decided that I've met a lot of folks that don't get a degree in it.
Sorry,
know a heck of a
objection.
lot of-
The statement that Mr. Gibson is the city's biologist is not in Dr. Trush's testimony and is not accurate. I think we've been clear on that point.
I'll note the objection. I'm not going to strike the testimony, but noted, and I understand it goes to the weight of that testimony, but understood. Go ahead, Dr. Trush.
Okay. So given that a biologist is a biologist, I reviewed his testimony as I would any scientist. And so I would be looking at how they dealt with evidence and how they made arguments. And so that's how I did my review with Mr. Gibson. as I went through the document, and it's huge, there's a lot of stuff. There's very little in there about the science. And so, trying to defend a particular stand or saying there's a particular effect, I could not ascertain that from that document. It needed to take the next step of a scientist.
Objection, this editorializing of his approach to Mr. Gibson's testimony is not relayed in his rebuttal testimony. And I would just ask that Ms. Kinsey, if you can instruct the witness to stick to his rebuttal testimony. I don't want to have to interrupt.
That's fair, Ms. O'Sullivan. So Dr. Trish, I realize it's frustrating, but if you would please go directly to the points in your testimony, that would be.
It wasn't intended that way, but yes.
I know. Yes.
Okay.
Can I just chime in for a second just to help guide
please,
Dr.
Ms. Hall,
Trush? I think it'd be most effective just to jump right to the two main points of your rebuttal testimony in response to Mr. Gibson's testimony.
Okie doke.
Thank you.
So Ms. Mullen, if you could put on the screen the text from line 11 to 19 on page 1. Okay, so this is one of the two primary topics, managing habitat of the entire main stem. And by the way, at the very bottom, I did not have time to eliminate that which shall not be named here as far as the self-renewal thing. So I'm not going to go down that far to bring it up. But if you need something to replace it with, stream ecosystem health is what we're really talking about there. Mr. Gibson states that moving the proposed wells downstream avoids the area upstream of the Alisal Bridge that has been identified. Oh, let's see. I think you guys showed me how to move the screen over so I could read that.
In theory, if
yes,
we can
drag. I got it.
Yes. Great.
I remembered that. Okay. But moving diversion downstream does not avoid important steelhead habitat. It merely relocates the impact. For example, if we place an X on the map of the watershed, anywhere an alevin hatches, the entire main stem channel network downstream is critical to that alevin's ability to return as a spawning adult. So moving this around and the importance of designated management habitat, it really does not make a difference. And that's the first thing that I want to get across, that when we start trying to pick out reaches based on some label and to treat it differently, we're starting to violate how this ecosystem needs to work. And so I don't think I could make it any clearer than that. But creating, maintaining, and protect this connectivity is important. Okay, but let's keep going down. The next little bit that I want to get into is on page 2, and it's line 15 to 20. So Mr. Gibson relies heavily on the 2000 BIOP to claim that the river downstream from Alisal is unimportant. So locating wells there will avoid impacts to steelhead. In reality, the steelhead population has kept on dropping. So we know that 2000 BIOP is not doing its job. NIMS determined that the 2000 BIOP contains incorrect assumptions and needs to be replaced. NIMS designated the entire main stem reach as critical habitat 2005, which left me wondering why we're having this conversation in the first place. And steelhead had been recorded spawning and rearing in the main stem downstream of Alisal. So the idea that you can take water out of a reach that is not important to enhance another, I take strong difference to that as an effective way. And to call it mitigation, I have very, very strong reservations about that. My next comment is on page 3 beginning at line 23. Asserting a specific diversions proposed downstream that Mr. Gibson calls critical designated management reaches should not warrant the same risk prevention downstream is false. As stated in my testimony, what happens to stream flows downstream Alisal Bridge has everything to do with basin steelhead recovery of the, and beginning on the next page at the very top, critically designated ecosystem. The ultimate success of all steelhead eggs deposited and fertilized within the main stem and tributaries will depend on what is happening downstream in the main stem, either directly or indirectly. So I can't stress enough that I would not consider this appropriate to be labeled mitigation, because there's no proof that it actually would do what it says it does.
Objection. The testimony about whether it's labeled mitigation and his opinion on that is not in his rebuttal testimony. And I'd ask that be stricken.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at paragraph 8. It's a quote from the EIR. You mean Dr. Trish's testimony about his opinion about whether the mitigation measures work?
No, I think he was making a point that I don't want to make it for him, but the location of the project being downstream of the Alisal Bridge and characterizing that as mitigation and his disagreement with that is not in his testimony. I fully agree that he's discussing the FEIR mitigation below, but I think that's a different point.
I think it's I'm going to overrule the objection. The word mitigation may not appear. I think I understand what Dr. Trish is referring to, and I think it's fair. You'll be able to cross-examine him about what he means about that. I just don't want to. I'm going to allow it in this case. So go ahead, Dr. Trish.
Okay. So my next little comment here is also on page 4, and it's line 13 to 16. The most worrisome are the diversions of small diversion impacts to spring and summertime mainstem juvenile rearing habitat and quantity. Even a 2 CFS diversion rate significantly restricts summertime juvenile rearing success in the mainstem channel in many years. I was looking for in Mr. Gibson's stuff any discussion on the role of different aspects of the hydrograph and how that might be considered when recommending additional diversions. But again, I saw nothing about that. And basically what I do there is just list what I said in my testimony, my written testimony. But it's an important one to consider because we're targeting a lot of these diversions right when the stream is naturally dropping from the late the late spring into midsummer. And so it's most vulnerable then. And I've seen very little discussion about that and none in what I reviewed. My next little piece is on page 5, and it's line 10 to 12. So consequently, Mr. Gibson and the city are incorrect at citing that the 2000 biop, that only the area upstream of Alisal is critical for steelhead, and that moving the proposed well downstream avoids critical habitat for steelhead. And it doesn't. Remembering that these designations have extended now all the way to the entire main stem channel. So picking out this one isn't warranted. And it goes against managing this river as an ecosystem rather than not. And last, on page 6, beginning on line 6. So, Mr. Gibson relies extensively on the biop, which includes, this is basically a summary. So it kind of repeats what I said. Then we go down to line 9. Simply allowing steelhead to occur, and this is what the management goal is, the 2000 BIMAT, to occur, which is not much of a goal, is insufficient from a biological perspective to help the species and meet their basic life history needs. Instead, the city's project will directly threaten the life cycle needs of steelhead. Mr. Gibson failed to acknowledge the 2000 BIOPS collective failure the last 20 years at measurably improving the steelhead population for stream ecosystem health. And then go down a little bit more, please. To the end there, 17. Thank you. And let's see which we were back up at. So 14. So ultimately, steelhead are currently at risk of extinction. The city of Solvang's proposed additional small diversions will not protect the steelhead. These diversions will adversely impact critical mainstem habitat downstream from Alisal, where steelhead migrate, spawn, and rear, and thus further hasten the threat of steelhead extinction. So that's my summary of this, and there's a lot of questions.
Thank you, Dr. Trish. I really appreciate your summary today. I will look to first the city of Solvang. Ms. O'Sullivan, do you have questions for Dr. Trish?
I do. Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. Good afternoon, Dr. Trish. Good to see you again. Thank you for taking my questions. All right, let's see. First, I want to just briefly touch on the 2000 biological opinion, which you referenced in your rebuttal testimony. To your knowledge, there's no subsequent biological opinion for the Kachuma project that's been finalized, right?
Right, and I'll just answer that as yes.
Okay. So currently, the Kachuma project, the biological opinion that currently applies to the Kachuma Dam operations is the 2000 biological opinion, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you acknowledge in your testimony that the 2000 biological opinion does identify the 10 miles between Bradbury Dam and the Alisal Bridge as a spawning and rearing area for steelhead, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware that that Reclamation has submitted a new project for consultation, right?
Yes, but I'm not privy to much about it.
That's fine, right? But to your understanding, the 2016 draft biological opinion is regarding a project that Reclamation is no longer pursuing, correct?
Yes, with so much behind that, but yes.
Okay, thank you. So just kind of stepping back for a moment, generally steelhead use different portions of the San Ynez River at different life stages, right?
Among other things, yes. I mean, besides just life stages.
Right. And so the suitability of a particular location on the river for, a migrating fish or a smolt or, a particular life stage depends on whether that location meets habitat criteria for that life stage, right?
Oftentimes. Remember, the steelhead is a fish that has to keep going upstream. It's got this amazing drive compared to a Chinook salmon, which is like a cow. This is a deer.
Okay.
And so when the fish go up the main stem river, they hit the dam, and they sit there and they try jumping, either ladder, try jumping, and you can see them look at the dam and go, if I just try a little harder, I can get that 80 feet. And they soon realize that they can't. So what they start doing, and most agencies will think of the reach right below the dam as an important habitat. But if that habitat is awful, they will use it.
Okay.
A number of times I've seen that happen.
Okay. And so you mentioned in your testimony some rearing habitat downstream of Alisal Bridge, right?
Yes. I mean, there's been
Okay.
surveys and observations, not much.
Okay, but you don't specify in your testimony where that is exactly? Okay, and there's about 30 miles of river between the Alsell Bridge and the ocean? Is that
I
right?
keep forgetting to look up my river miles on the GS topos, but I think that's about right. Yeah.
Okay, so when you're talking about downstream, it could be anywhere within those 30 miles downstream, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, in your testimony, you relied on the annual monitoring summaries for the Kachuma project performed for the 2000 biological opinion, correct?
I've read them, but I didn't rely on them in any substantial way with respect here. I used them a lot when I was doing the River Institute report.
Okay, but you cite to two of them in your rebuttal
Yes,
testimony,
yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
But that's just examples.
Okay. And the specific reports that you cite to were for the years 2020 and 2012, right?
Yes, I believe that's right.
Okay, so that's just 2 years in the past 2 decades, right?
That I cited, yes.
Okay. I want to take a look at the 2012 report. Okay. Well, let's see how far we can get just based on your recollection, and if you need, we'll pull up the actual report if needed. So the fish observations that you're quoting in your testimony were observed in the Caldwell Reach, correct?
I believe so. It's a little fuzzy, but yes.
Okay, how about this, Dr. Tresh? Let's Ms. Mullen, if we could bring up Cal Trout 11, please. Okay, and actually, I apologize, Ms. Mullen. I think to help Dr. Tresh, we need to first look at the citation in his testimony. So if we could pull up Cal Trout 37, please, page 2, paragraph 3, lines 7 through 9. Okay, and so Dr. Tresh, you see that it starts on line 7 with the word more. You say more specifically in 2012, biologists documented some steelhead, and then the citation is to Cal Trout 11 at pages 26 through 27. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so Ms. Mullen, now if we could, we're going to go investigate Cal Trout 11. We could go there. And it's Dr. Tresh cited the page numbers on the report, so it's actually PDF page 42. Okay, and if we could scroll down a little bit. Okay, does this look familiar, Dr. Tresh, that this is the reach that you were citing from?
I think so. I'm not positive.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, if you could just scroll down a little further. To the end, where maybe I can see the rest, the next page, the first paragraph, the next page as well. Okay, and just go back up a little bit, apologies. Okay, so Dr. Tresh, if you can see the paragraph above and below the Caldwell Reach proper, and the last sentence, you can see where you found your 174 YOY.
End of the year.
Okay, so I think we're oriented now, correct?
Right.
Okay, so if we could scroll back up a little bit, Ms. Mullen, so the Caldwell Reach heading is showing. Okay, so I think you can answer now that the fish observations that you were quoting were near the Caldwell Reach of the San Ynez River, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's approximately 20 miles downstream from the Kachuma Dam, right?
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know, but I know it's a ways down.
Okay, so if I can direct
that would
you
seem
to
reasonable.
the first sentence of the second paragraph here, visible under the Caldwell Reach heading. It starts, well, the Caldwell property, and then you see the LSYR 22.0 to 23.0. Do you see that?
Can I say that again?
I'm looking at, under the Caldwell Reach paragraph heading, the second full paragraph, It
Okay.
starts the Cadwell property.
Okay, yes, sorry.
Okay, and you see where it says LSYR 22.0 through 23.0,
Right.
right?
Okay,
Okay, and I'll assert to you that LSYR, those numbers, those are river miles from the Kachuma Dam.
correct.
So with that, do you agree that the Cadwell Reach is approximately 20 miles downstream of the Kachuma Dam?
Yes,
Okay, and so that would place this reach about 10 miles downstream from the project site, right?
yes,
Okay. And the 2012 fish numbers that you quoted in your testimony are all from spring observations, is that right?
yes,
Okay, and so the COMB performs these surveys in the summer and fall too, right?
correct.
Okay, and you didn't report any observations from the summer survey?
Now, my purpose in citing all of this was simply to say there are fish below the reach that we've been talking about. That's simply as that.
Right, but you didn't report whether they were there in the summer or the fall, right?
No, didn't see the necessity for doing that.
Okay, and you also didn't report fish observations at in the reach where the project area is, right?
No,
Okay, and you didn't report any fish observations upstream of the project area between the Kachuma Dam and Alisal Bridge. Okay, so Ms. Mullen, if we could go to page 126, please, or excuse me, PDF page 142. Got both page numbers here. Okay, Dr. Trush, do you see table 15 there on the screen?
Oh, yes, I do. Sorry.
Yes, okay, thank you. And you can see by the heading on table 15 that this is summarizing the spring, summer, and fall snorkel surveys of the 2012 season. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. And in the summer column, there was only one fish observed in the Cadwell Reach, correct?
yes,
And there were no fish observed in the fall?
correct.
Okay, and there were no fish observed in the Avenue Flags Reach, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, and the project site is located in Avenue of Flags Reach, correct?
yes,
Okay. And so there were fish observed in the reaches upstream of the Alisal Bridge for all three surveys, correct?
yes.
Okay, thank you. You can take this down, Ms. Mullen. I also want to talk about that 2020 survey numbers that you cited. So if we could just go back to CalTrout 37, I want to orient you, Dr. Trush, to the citation that you made. Okay, so if we look at lines 12 through 14, well, I guess it's right on line 12, where you start citing to CalTrout 7, pages 50 through 51. Do you see that?
Yes,
Okay, great. And Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up CalTrout 7, and it's actually PDF page 71, which corresponds to the pages Dr. Trush is citing to. Okay. We could just scroll down so that paragraph is visible. Oh, thank you. All right. Can we scroll up so we can see the heading for this section? Thank you. So in the testimony that we just looked at, you were again observing that some fish were observed, and you cited these pages. And so this observation that you're quoting from in 2020 is at Sweeney Road crossing and Robinson Bridge, correct?
yes,
Yes, okay. And looking at, again here, the LSYR numbers that are cited in this document for that location on the river, this reach is approximately 36 miles downstream of the Kachuma Dam, correct? between 26 and 36 miles.
Okay,
Okay. So again, that'd be approximately 26 miles downstream of the project site, right?
yes,
Okay. And the observations that you quote were made in May, in the spring, is that correct?
yes,
Okay. But the fish that were observed in May actually had to be relocated in later that spring due to drying conditions, right?
I can't say I remember that, but yes,
Okay, if we could scroll down, Ms. Mullen,
I,
to
I believe you.
uh, there should be a subsection titled Fish Rescue and Relocation there at the bottom of this page. Yes. Okay, so if you could take a look at that paragraph, Dr. Tresh. The first sentence reads, due to the presence of Omicus and the observation of drying conditions in the late spring, and with the coordination and approval of NIMS and CDFW, a fish rescue team was assembled. And I'm going to skip over a little bit. So that they assembled a fish rescue team to move these fish, correct?
What it says, yes,
Okay. And those fish were relocated to upstream stable rearing habitats, correct?
since I'm not really remembering this paragraph, I'd have
Okay,
to
if you
read
look at
that
the last,
specifically.
if you look at the last sentence, it can help refresh your recollection.
Okay,
Let me know when you've read it.
I did,
Okay, so they were relocated to upstream stable rearing habitats, correct?
correct.
Okay. And then, in the summer of 2020, this area where you noted fish observations was dry, correct?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, that's all on this exhibit. Thank you very much. Okay, I just want to, you pulled out 2 years of fish observations, so I just want to talk about a few others to give a more holistic viewpoint. Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up Solvang 103. And again, I'm going to be going through different years of these same annual monitoring reports. So they'll follow a pattern. If we could go to PDF page 150, please. And so similar to the 2012 report that we looked at, this is the table summarizing the snorkel surveys for the 2019 survey year. Do you see that, Dr. Tresh?
yes, I do.
Okay. And going from the bottom up, the Codwell Reach shows 0 fish observed in all 3 seasons, correct?
Yes,
Same with the Avenue of Flags Reach.
yes,
But there are fish observed in the Highway 154 reach, correct?
yes,
And that's upstream of the Alisal Bridge, right?
correct,
And that's within the first 10 miles of the Kachuma Dam, right?
correct.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Mullen, could we pull up Solvang 104, please? All right, and if we could go to PDF page 130, please. And again, this is the table summarizing the snorkel surveys for the 2018 year. You see that, Dr. Tresh?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And again, from the bottom up, Codwell Reach, downstream of the project, shows 0 fish observed in the spring, summer, and fall, correct?
Yep,
Same with the Avenue of Flags.
yep,
Okay. And again, the area within 10 miles at the Highway 154 reach, within 10 miles of the Kachuma Dam, actually in this one, shows no fish, correct?
yes,
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Mullen, if we could go to Solvang 105, please. And to PDF page 129. Okay, so going again from the bottom up, Caldwell Reach, so 0 fish, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and I apologize, I meant to say this is, again, the table summarizing the snorkel surveys this time in 2017, correct?
Hmm.
Okay, and the Avenue of Flags Reach also shows no fish, correct?
Yep.
Okay, and the only fish that were observed this year were above the Alisal Bridge, correct?
um, yeah,
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Mullen, if you don't mind, if we can go to solving 106, please, and PDF page 116. We might need to go down a little bit. I'm looking for table 15 again. Yes, thank you. So once again, this is table 15, summarizing the snorkel surveys for the 2016 season. And we see again, correct, Dr. Trush?
all zeros.
Okay, yes,
Yes.
all zeros. So again, just to be clear, there's, for the record, there's no fish were observed in the Cadwell Reach, correct?
Yes.
And no fish were observed in the Avenue of Flags Reach, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And there was 1 fish observed in the Highway 154 Reach, correct?
Okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Mullen, if we could go to solving 107, please. And PDF page 128, please. And once again, we're looking at table 15, which is the summary of the snorkel surveys for the 2015 season. Do you see that, Dr. Trush?
They do.
Okay, and once again, in the Caldwell Reach row, there are no fish observed, correct?
Yes.
And same with the Avenue of Flags Reach.
Mhm.
That's a yes.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And the only fish once again observed were observed upstream of the Alisal Bridge in the Highway 154 Reach, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Mullen, if we could go to solving 108, please. And PDF page 132. And so once again, table 15 showing the summarizing the spring, summer, and fall snorkel survey results this time for the year of 2014. Do you see that, Dr. Trush?
I do.
Okay, and the caught in this table, it's a little, I feel like this one has some typos, but again, it's showing that only fish were observed in the Highway 154 Reach, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You can take that down, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. So based on all these observations from 2014 to 2019, there were no Omicus observed in the spring, summer, or fall in the Avenue of Flags Reach, correct?
In those locations, yes.
Okay, or the Codwell Reach, correct?
Yes.
But they were consistently observed above the Alisal Bridge, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I'm going to exercise my prerogative and say I need a break. I need 10 minutes. So I'm sorry to keep you here a little longer, Dr. Trish, but let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then when we return, I will look around the room to see if there's additional cross-examination.
Okay, so you're going to start up. I'm sorry, you're going to start up again when?
At 3:58.
Okay.
10 minutes, according to my clock, is 3:58. So I will see
I
all
got
of
my stopwatch here, so I can.
Great. I'll see all of you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I am back online. I'll wait a moment for others to turn on their cameras. Hi, Dr. Trush. I see you're here. And we have I'm sorry, Ms. Hall. And I believe where we're going to pick up, I was going to turn to next to CCRB. Mr. Bivens, do you have questions for Dr. Trish?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I will continue. The parent district, do you have any questions for Dr. Trish?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. ID number 1.
We do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Alice Hall Guest Ranch.
No, thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have additional questions, so I think that just leaves me to turn back to you, Ms. Hall. Do you have redirect based on the cross-examination of Dr. Trush?
I do, thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, great. I will start a little bit by working backwards, if that's okay. So Dr. Trush, you were asked about a handful of surveys of steelhead in the San Ynez River. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Great. So based on your experience, does the absence of observation of a particular species during a survey indicate they're not present in the region or that the area does not contain important habitat?
Usually not.
And I believe you're aware of significant access issues on private property in the river, which has impaired the ability to survey the San Ynez River for steelhead. So in light of that, do you believe the surveys conducted on the San Ynez River are comprehensive in indicating the importance of the river for steelhead?
Probably wouldn't call them comprehensive, but doing as good a job as they can. Almost every project I've worked on always has a paucity of observations like that because of budgets. No one likes to spend money on monitoring.
Right, but it's not an indication of the unsuitability of habitat in that region, correct?
No.
And can you explain how, despite these snorkel surveys, the entire San Ynez River is important to steelhead from a biological perspective?
Well,
Objection. That's outside the scope of my cross-examination. My questions were limited to the fish surveys and their results.
I think that's fair, so I'm going to sustain that objection.
Okay, I'll save that for the other questions about steelhead life cycle needs. But just to wrap up on the surveys real quick, Ms. O'Sullivan also referenced fish rescues. So does that indicate to you that of the fish that were observed, there were clearly threats to existing individuals due to drying river conditions? Right?
Yes. I've read the 2017s all the way to the present when I first came on with you guys at Cal Trout. And I forgot if the discharge was measured in each of those data points that you saw, because you're not going to get many fish when the flow is incredibly low.
And is the fact that fewer fish were found in the Cadwell Reaches and the Lompoc Narrows in the summer and fall surveys, those times of year, when there was diminished water in the river during those times, does that heighten your concern about withdrawing further water from the river?
Oh, yes, I do. Probably the tributary with the best chance is Sausapuetas Creek of having some impact. And of course, it comes in just above Lompoc. But when you see the data for that, and you look at the USGS records, it's bone dry when they're sampling fish or netting fish coming out of Sausapuetas Creek.
Okay, thank you. So that's it on the surveys, but as far as back to Ms. O'Sullivan's first questions on the 2000 biological opinion and 2016 draft biop. So you state in your rebuttal testimony that the 2000 biop does not state that the river upstream from Alisal is better habitat than the river downstream, correct?
Yes.
And the 20,000 biop does not say that the river downstream is less important specifically for steelhead migration, correct?
believe so. I can't remember exactly, but I believe so.
And is it your understanding that the 2000 biop has been ineffective in managing steelhead and that they're currently threatened with extinction?
I don't think you'll get anyone to argue against that.
Thank you. As well as you also confirmed that the 2016 biop, the underlying project has currently been withdrawn, but just to confirm, you're aware that consultation on the Kachuma project itself is currently ongoing, and there's no question that that must be completed pursuant to the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah. The 2016 being been stonewalled for quite a while and frustrating some of the agencies. They could talk about that better than I.
But your understanding is that there's still a dire need to complete that ongoing consultation process, and that process is currently continuing to be underway, correct?
Absolutely.
And can you please confirm that even though the 2016 biop is a draft, it does provide more recent and therefore more helpful information regarding the current status of steelhead in the San Ynez River?
It's an incremental change.
Objection. I did not ask any questions about the content of the 2016 biop. My questions were limited to the status of which biop was final and in effect.
I think I'm going to sustain the objection. I also, just to note, Ms. Hall, I think we've talked about this before, and I understand the point here, so I think we can move on for several reasons. Thank you.
Okay, understood. So just shifting to the final set of questions that Ms. O'Sullivan asked you about, steelhead using different portions of the river for different life stages, and she asked about rearing habitat downstream of Alisal, as well as the 30 miles of river between Alisal and the ocean. So given that question, can you explain how the main stem and tributary connectivity is critical for steelhead and how the project's interference with an interconnected main stem channel harms steelhead?
Sounds like about 5 lectures worth. No, utilizing the main stem is the only way we're going to ever be able to get back a healthy steelhead population. That's not on the razor edge of extinction as it is now. Not everything is accomplished in every single location in the stream, and the river's got this amazing ability to maximize many variables at the same time, which seems like an impossibility, but they do it by a variable hydrograph. So we have to combine the variable annual hydrographs with considering the entire reach, and eventually what we've got to come to realize is that it's a numbers game. To produce the number of smolts that we need, numbers like just mentioned earlier in the surveys up by the dam of 250 fish is utterly nothing. I mean, not even nothing as far as being able to expect recovery. So you need an engine that's capable of producing the number of smolts to actually bring back a decent sized population. And that requires the whole main stem.
Thank you. And specifically, can you explain how important the timing of migration and passage is with respect to adult steelhead, both accessing and migrating up tributaries, and how your analysis here shows that the project would limit steelhead access to spawning?
I mentioned that in the rebuttal, but I decided to skip it. But since you bring it up, yes, the 2 places we can get spawning is in the main stem, generally higher up, but not always, and as well as the tributaries. And so the hydrographs of the tributaries down low are very spiked. I mean, the peak down to the base flow after a storm, you measure it in hours.
Objection. I did not ask anything about tributaries, so I think this is getting beyond the scope of cross-examination.
I understood the question to be about different portions of the river and what steelhead need from a biological life cycle perspective. So Dr. Trush is speaking to the different life cycle needs of steelhead in reliance on the San Ynez River.
And I'll overrule the objection as long as the focus here is on tributaries are connected to the main stem and the fish go in between them, as I understand them. So we're focused here on the main stem, but you can continue, Dr. Trish, with the focus being on that
Short and sweet
connection.
it takes a different strategy to utilize the tributaries because of the peakness in the hydrographs. And so the way that was accomplished was there were always high flows in the main stem channel during the migration season. Now there's not. And oftentimes there's no water in the channel at all. So in order to take advantage of the tributaries, which you have to start relying on them more now that you've got a big dam there, that the steelhead adults have to be at the base of those watersheds when the flood starts, not trying to get over the estuary and work their way upstream. By the time they get up there, the storm is over and there's no opportunity to migrate up into the tributaries to spawn. So we greatly reduce our potential for producing smolts ultimately and adults. That's it.
And is it correct that your testimony provides that even slight delays in arriving at a tributary mouth can have significant effects on accessing spawning habitat?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Could you also just elaborate a bit on the juvenile steelhead rearing and kind of explain how your analysis shows that the diversions would affect that life cycle, which I believe you referenced in paragraph 8 of your rebuttal testimony?
So much to say. I have to check what do you mean in 8?
Just to speak to the concept of juvenile steelhead rearing, and the life cycle needs of steelhead with respect to that, which I believe is referenced in paragraph 8.
Okay. Well, basically we kind of think the stream runs on 1+ juveniles. So they spend that first summer finding a place to live, and then making it through into the next spring, and then heading out on that spring hydrograph just when the productivity of the river ecosystem is starting to peak. And so remember that the chore of each one of those individual fish is to get to the ocean as big and healthy as they can. And in order to do that, it's not simply about being able to have access swimming downstream, but to be able to grow yourself big enough that you've got a chance of coming back as an adult after hitting the ocean. The fish know that. They're programmed to do that. And so everything they do is towards trying to accomplish that goal. Is that kind of what you wanted?
Yes, thank you. I think that might cover my questions. Let me just double check my notes here. Well, just one more question on this life cycle needs issue. At paragraph 7, you talk about the ultimate success of steelhead eggs within the main stem and tributaries will depend on what's happening downstream, either directly or indirectly. So can you explain, Ms. O'Sullivan referenced this large portion of, 30 miles of the river between Onsall and the ocean. So can you just put that into context for us and explain that overall importance of what's happening downstream and how that is critical to steelhead?
Try to. It's when you look at the monitoring results and you see so few fish where they were taken, I'm glad I actually got to look at all those tables again, because it shows me the problem that we really are having. So those fish that might be rearing up in above Alisal, they're not all just staying there. They're a product of fish that are moving through. And so there's a component of that cohort that's moving through, but the evidence of them surviving well downstream is not very good. Partly why I wanted to know, very little about the flows between the two gauges, between Solvang on down. And so to have a whole functioning main stem can actually start to produce the numbers of fish that is necessary for the recovery of the population. I'm not sure, I might have answered around it, but I'm not quite sure what you were asking.
I think that covers it. Thank you. And I think
Okay.
that concludes my questions. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hall. Based on that redirect, do you have additional questions, Ms. O'Sullivan?
I think just one. Dr. Trush, you mentioned a tributary, Salplitis, I'm probably mispronouncing that, creek.
It took me a while.
Yeah, so you recall referring to that tributary as a important tributary for the Steelhead?
Not in my testimony, but it was a major factor when I was doing the River Institute
Well,
report.
in response to Ms. Hall's questions, I should be more specific.
Well, that's one that falls to mind because it's a big watershed and it's
Mhm.
close to the mouth. So the chance of fish realizing their dream or their I shouldn't say dream, but their mission is pretty high at Sausapoitas Creek,
Okay,
provided there's any water at Lompoc.
and just to be clear, that Salsapoitas Creek is near Lompoc, right?
It's just upstream. It comes in of the
Okay, so
bridge.
many miles downstream from the project site, correct?
Many,
Okay.
and that's another
Thank-
chance.
Thank you,
'Cause
that's all.
Okay,
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Crush.
all right.
Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I believe with that, I want to really thank you for joining us again, Dr. Trish, and putting up with all the lawyers doing the lawyer things. But I really appreciate your testimony and you joining us and taking the time to do that. Thank you. And with that, I believe you are excused for today. So
Okay.
appreciate it.
All right.
And I will, at this point, turn to a recap of where we are. I believe this, Ms. Hall, was CalTrout's one rebuttal witness. Is that right? Yes. I think I had mentioned, it's possible we could address CalTrout's exhibits today. I know I have deferred rulings on portions of Dr. Trish's testimony, both the case-in-chief testimony and his rebuttal testimony. I'm not planning to rule on them right at this moment because I'd like to take some time to digest what we went through today. So I wasn't going to go through a full admission of the exhibits. What I thought we could do that might be productive, though, is if you could give us, if you're prepared, if you can give us a preview, Ms. Hall, of which exhibits you will plan to offer into evidence so that we can just verify our records. And if there's any discrepancy, we have time to sort that out before we reconvene. Are you in a position to give us a preview of what the offer will be?
Yes, so I believe I've worked through the various rulings and have a list of exhibits that were not subject to objection or where the objections have been overruled. And those would be the exhibits. So I could go through those numerically if that makes sense.
Yes, please.
Okay, so we would move to offer, both case-in-chief and rebuttal exhibits into evidence submitted by California Trout. Those include Cal Trout exhibits 1 through 2. And then on the issues of exhibits, namely the testimony where certain portions have been are still pending. Should I just skip over those for now?
Yes, that's fine. I mean, you're planning on offering, for example, CalTrout 2, and that there are certain portions that are deferred, but I just, the remainder, regardless of my ruling, I was going to say the remainder you would be offering into evidence. So that's
okay. So I believe CalTrout 1 and 2, there was no question, but then CalTrout 3, Dr. Tresh's direct testimony.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yes, so we would move to enter that except for, as of now, the portions of paragraphs 6, 19, 20, and 21, which are still pending. We would move to enter CalTrout 5 through 15, CalTrout 17 through 18, 20 through 33, 35, and then CalTrout 37, the rebuttal testimony, except for the one objection that was sustained at paragraph 1, lines 5 through 9, and then the 2 issues that were deferred. Then we would move to CalTrout 38 through 54, as well as CalTrout 56 through 59.
Okay, I believe that fits with what we have in our records as well. And just to be clear, I know CalTrout 4, I believe I had deferred ruling on it. I'll rule on it, and then assuming I don't exclude it, were you planning to offer CalTrout 4 into evidence as well?
Yes, I just didn't include that.
Yeah, because I had deferred on just wanted to make sure. That's helpful. So I will make those rulings before we formally take an offer. But maybe what we can do in the time allowed, because I believe I put everyone on notice, is ask whether there are any parties who have are planning or who are raising hearsay objections to any of Caltrout's exhibits.
The city does have some, I just am looking down to make sure that I don't want to say any that were Ms. Hall is not planning to admit anyways, so I'm just double checking here.
I believe if I tracked correctly, I believe Ms. Hall is planning on offering everything that wasn't excluded. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah, that's a much more succinct way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay.
And Ms. O'Sullivan, we don't have to do, I mean, it's an efficient use of time. If you're prepared to identify the hearsay objections, that's great. If you're not, we can defer doing that. But
I mean,
Okay.
I'm prepared to offer a brief oral argument, make the objection orally, but then we would, flesh out the objection in writing by the 20th as you
yes,
ordered. Yeah.
yes, please, if you would identify those, I think that would be a good use of our time since we have a little bit.
Yes. Okay. So the city would be objecting on the grounds of hearsay based on Government Code 11513 and consistent case law that hearsay cannot be sufficient to support a finding on its own. And this would go to Caltrout 12, 29, 30, 31, 32, 39, 41, 51, and then Ms. Hall, I think you did not say, you said you were not going to offer 55, right?
Caltrout 55 has been excluded.
Yeah, okay, that's where I just
yes.
had a little miss on my notes. Okay. And then in addition to, I just want to, for Caltrout 51, I also want to object on the grounds that it's improper rebuttal testimony and lacks foundation. If you look at it, it's a report dated October 4th, 2023 that's prepared for the purposes of this hearing, and it's unauthored. And Caltrout has presented no witness to present that testimony. It's not cited in any of their direct or rebuttal testimonies, and it was submitted as a rebuttal exhibit. And now we know, since we've gotten through the city's exhibits, that it was not used in cross-examination on any one of our witnesses. So, on the objections for the round of direct testimony, the city kind of got the message that objecting to documents just because they were uncited in a testimony wasn't, good grounds. But now that we've gotten through all of the city's testimony and Caltrout hasn't used this document at all, the city would object to that document on those additional grounds, in addition to the hearsay objection, and that's Caltrout 51.
Okay.
So just a quick question on that. My understanding was that the new deadline was for hearsay objections only, or will there be opportunities for additional objections that go beyond hearsay?
It's going to be this one I think is a judgment call. I mean, I had set a deadline for written objections, which has passed.
Understood.
And the new deadline is strictly for hearsay objections. So what if I do accept this objection as timely, I would consider it an oral objection raised during the hearing, and I would rule on it in, orally and ask for your response orally. I think Ms. O'Sullivan, you raised reasons that you hadn't you identified reasons, you were waiting to see if Caltrout would use the document in cross-examination or if it was otherwise substantiated in some way based on the evidence. I don't know if at this time, Ms. Hall, do you have a response? Do you want to respond?
Well, just as an initial response, there are documents that we've submitted that we intend to rely on in our closing brief that we obviously haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. And on this issue, Caltrout did not have an expert on water conservation. I believe that exhibit relates to conservation, so it wouldn't have come up during the hearing itself, but it's still open to be used in the closing brief. This was our intention.
And 51, just remind me, 51 would be, that's a rebuttal. Yes, that's in your, in rebuttal. I think the way I'll deal with this is that I do think it's an I'm accepting hearsay objections. I do think this is an untimely objection to rebuttal evidence. I realize, Ms. O'Sullivan, that lack of use hadn't, what I did with case in chief testimony is that I made the ruling that lack of reliance by a witness, that a witness was not required to authenticate or provide a foundation for particular exhibits, that there had to be a more specific objection, but I did allow the city to raise those more specific objections, and I think the same premise would have applied for the rebuttal exhibits. And I don't want to open the door now that we're in the heat of the moment, on additional objections outside of hearsay. So I am going to say that, call that overruled based on the timeliness of the objection for Cal Trout 51, but I appreciate you raising that. I understand, now is an appropriate time.
Now or never.
Now or never, yeah.
Thank you, and understood, Officer Kinsey.
Yeah. Are there other, I should check with you, Ms. O'Sullivan, did that complete your list of the hearsay objection exhibits?
Yes, I had a note about one of the deferred, there's one objection to Cal Trout 5 that was overruled without prejudice, and so I guess I would just review that objection. And specifically, so Cal Trout 5 is the 2016 BIOP, and our objection was that for the purposes of Dr. Trush's testimony, it doesn't support the premise, the statement that it's being offered for, because he uses it as support for the 150 CFS flow requirement at the project site or LSL Bridge, whereas the 2016 BIOP that's a 150 CFS release from Kachuba Dam. And so we would just reassert that objection when you're ready to rule on that.
Okay, I will identify that as one I need to take a look at.
Thank you.
I will look again to the room. Ms. Bivens, sorry, it's the end of the day. I can't talk anymore, Mr. Bivens. I see you're on camera. Do you have any hearsay objections that you'd like to raise or other comments on?
As far as other comments, one, you're forgiven. And two, I will also object to the 2016 draft BIOP Caltrat Exhibit 5 as case-specific hearsay. I won't belabor the point, but we'll follow up in writing as you've requested.
Okay, great. And Mr. Kvistad, I see you are on camera. Did you have additional hearsay objections to raise?
No, we do not.
You're just politely on camera in case I ask you.
Just in case.
Thank you. I will just generally look to the room. Is there anyone else who would like to raise hearsay objections?
This is Brett Stroud for the Parent District. I will join in the party on the 2016 BIOP objection, but also won't belabor the point.
Okay, thank you.
And the same for the LSL Ranch. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I think we'll leave this topic. I need to sort out ruling on some of these issues, and we'll come back to this. But I appreciate, Ms. Hall, you working through the exhibits, and then all of you for having those hearsay objections. I think that saves us hopefully saves us some time on next week. Before we break, we reconvene, I believe, a week from today on the 13th. My inclination would be to go ahead and hear from CDFW and NIMFS, their two rebuttal witnesses first, and finish on that point, and then turn to CCRB, unless someone has an alternate suggestion. So just in terms of ordering, that's was what I was thinking. Are there other procedural issues we should address before we break for the next week and return on the 13th at 9 o'clock? Ms. O'Sullivan.
Yes, just a question of when you plan to make the determination regarding the SIR rebuttal to Mr. Custis's testimony. was in your,
Before the
Order.
13th.
okay, thank you. I'm not trying to rush you at all.
No. Well, and we received I saw this morning, I believe it was this morning that the city's response came in. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to take a look at it, and I will get it to you as soon as possible, so you know what to expect, because you're right. We would need to schedule time for Mr. Nicely as well if we're going back to that.
Thank you.
Are there any other procedural issues? Well, thank you once again. Thank you. It was a good day. It was productive. It was busy. I appreciate all of you being here, and I will see, we are adjourned until next Wednesday. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you.